Good afternoon, everyone. We're on item number 6, the Glenmont Corridors Opportunity Study, where staff is recommending for the board to receive briefing on the Glenmont Corridors Opportunity Study and transmit to the Montgomery County Council. This afternoon, we have Zubin Adrianvala and Luwei Wang to present this item. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the board. For the record, Zubin Adrianvala with Montgomery County, Mid-County Planning. Today we are here to share the results of nearly 1 year of study and analysis for the Glenmont Corridors Opportunity Study. As already mentioned, we request that the Planning Board receive a briefing and then transmit the study.
Could you make it louder? I have a hard time to hear you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure,
thank
I can try that. So we request that you receive the briefing today and then transmit the study to County Council also for briefing. Quick recap about what a study is. So studies examine current conditions and offer recommendations and strategies to foster future stewardship of Montgomery County's natural and built environment and its communities. Through studies, planning staff develops insightful, hopefully insightful and understandable and data-driven insights and analysis for policy-relevant research on land use, demographics, economic indicators, real estate, and other market forces. So a study is a tool to understand a particular planning issue, and in most cases, won't change zoning or make recommendations that need to be implemented through zoning. So with that,
can I ask a question
Sure.
here? Because I guess probably I'm going to ask it from Robert. I have asked that before, and that's my only question today for this subject, is that why study? Why can't we just go to master plan? We know that Glenmont needs a lot of a study, and a lot, it needs something there. And I believe that when we do a study, just delay the process. And this study could be part of the master plan when we know that area needs improvement. We just jump into master plan rather than doing a study. It saves time and it saves money.
So great question, thank you. I think there's a number of reasons we do the study, and in some cases it may not result in a master plan. That may be one of the elements that comes out. I think we have a better understanding of kind of what the community resources are by doing this study, because it's not necessarily in the end recommending any kind of zoning changes. It's not recommending any major recommendations to land use or some other things. It's just pointing out that these are some things that need to be evaluated. So we've done a study in Friendship Heights that ended up going to a master plan, and at the time we weren't sure if it was going to be a master plan or not in terms of an update. When we did get to the master plan for Friendship Heights, it cut a year of study off, so we're able to kind of fast track the master plan process a little bit more than we would in other areas. Germantown was another one. We weren't quite sure what the issues were that we were going to be evaluating in Germantown, and so the study made sense for that one. And that one, again, has resulted in a master plan that's now on our books. But it's a great question. I may see if Ms. Sanders has anything else to add, but it does offer a different type of analysis that we can do with the study that doesn't necessarily at this point result in recommendations that are zoning and land use related.
I totally get it, but my question is that all the master plans, if you don't do a study and you start with the master plan, you're going to do the study at the very beginning of the master plan. This is part of the process of the master plan. And if we just make it as part of master plan, and if it doesn't end up that you don't need to have a master plan, that usually we need to do something with the master plan. I don't know what is the chance of that not happening. It just continues the process with no delays, and basically when you get the community comments, you don't want to delay it because the community comments get outdated by the time that you're going to start master plan. So maybe we could have this as a beginning, I'm just putting the idea, I'm not suggesting, but I'm thinking about it because I asked the same question when we did Friendship Height, and I asked the same question when we did the employment study for Germantown, and they both ended up to master plan, but in my opinion, it delayed the master plan. We couldn't stop a study, we could have started the master plan and move on, especially for an area that we know is really needed. Glenmont does need it. So we are hoping that we ended up to a master plan, so why not start with master?
And I'm sorry, let me,
Yeah,
one more. I think with the study, you know, if we took the traditional master plan, we're looking at a boundary and a scope that's involved with that particular area. I do think the study can expand beyond that so that we have a broader understanding of maybe community needs or community impacts within a study area. Now, granted, that could be part of a master plan too. So point taken. I know we've had the conversation before about why not just go straight to a master plan, and I think in some areas they may not be ready for that. And the study could give us guidance for or inform us for something maybe a few years down the road. But yes, I mean, a lot of the same work would happen within a master plan. So, Ms. Sanders.
Oh, thank you. Carrie Sanders for the record, Mid-County Division Chief. One thing I will add is with Thrive Montgomery 2050, the general plan for the county that was adopted a few years back, 15-minute living was an integral part of that plan. And part of the goals for 15-minute living is that we should try to have that throughout the county in what we call these different centers. And Glenmont is one of those centers. And so part of what we wanted to do with this was to explore that concept through a specific example and to help us better define what that means and how we may have actions to achieve that. So I would say this one was approached a little differently than some of our other efforts in that way because it followed Thrive. And the second example that I wanted to mention, we did a study also on the Pike District a few years ago. That study didn't result in a change to the sector plan, but what the study did do was give some short-term actions for the North Bethesda Metro Station site. And those actions, many of which have been advanced, which is great. And as you know, WMATA is currently looking at redevelopment of that site with the county as a partner. So what we find is sometimes these studies, can provide some short-term actions that can help advance the plan. The last thing I'll mention, though, is I think you bring up some very good points, Vice Chair, and I think we're continuing to evaluate how we approach studies. And so, frankly, with each study, we sort of learn a little bit more. And I think, we're happy to receive your feedback and kind of think about that as we develop our strategic plan for the planning department and kind of, see if maybe the studies can be approached a bit differently or perhaps can explore specific elements of Thrive like this one.
Yeah, great question, Vice Chair, and great answers. And overall, some of these work plans were developed like a couple years ago, and we will look as we do more what's going on in the work plan. Is there something that could go directly into, what are the steps that would trigger? Can you go automatically into one, or do you do study? The good news about this one, as I recall, is that there aren't any or a few zoning changes required in what I've read to implement a lot of the recommendations you had here. So, but good questions. Please.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, so the study outline as it is laid out in front of you is, we'll start with a quick introduction. I'll do a recap of our study's goals. We'll look at some existing conditions. My colleague will introduce the concept of 15-minute living and how we analyze that. We use some methodologies which were quite exciting and helped us dive deep into how we could sort of measure 15-minute living. We also had an informal economy study that was centered on the Glenmont Shopping Center. And before that, we did some focus groups. So between this community input, some expert input, we were able to come up with a vision for the community overall. And then at the end, we'll end with some strategies, which, as you'll see, mimics the structure of Thrive more or less, and that allows us to look at strategies for this area specifically. Quickly, the goals of the study were to encourage mixed-use development near the metro station, to create a cohesive community core, promote diverse housing options to meet the need of Glenmont's diverse population, enhance the multimodal transportation network to improve connectivity and access to public transit for people walking, biking, and rolling, create inviting open spaces that serve as community gathering areas and allow access to urban green spaces, and align these objectives with the broader county goals, particularly through a lens of complete communities and through Thrive overall. So quick recap of the study area. What we did was, the sort of foundation of this was the idea of looking at the two corridors, which are Georgia Avenue and Randolph Road. So if you see this map up here, that looks at some properties along those corridors. And then we also had an existing master plan whose recommendations are relatively recent. So we had the Glenmont Sector Plan from 2013 rather. And then we also, because the 15-minute living idea was integral, we kind of expanded it a little bit and took a 20-minute walk shed from Glenmont Metro Station and took that geography. Kind of merging these three geographies, we came up with a study area that allowed us to meaningfully explore some of these concepts, along with complete communities and corridor-focused growth. So quick dive into the study area's demographics.
Could you go back to that study area?
Sure.
On the next close to Weir's Mill Road, is there any reason that you excluded the park? Is that our park? That would be something that helps to show that you have more green space and see if there is a 15-minute walk shed to that park.
Yes, so I think we didn't want to expand the boundaries too much, but as you'll notice in our analysis of 15-minute living, we capture way more than just those parks that are either within or around the study area. So Wheaton Regional Park becomes a significant kind of magnet in the community, and we do explore how people can get there. But of course, Wheaton Regional Park has been a subject of a recent parks planning effort. So we kind of excluded the sort of overall park, and then the study area itself is home to some parks which serve as assets. So we have, in our analysis, looked at how people can walk or take bikes or transit to the various parks in the surrounding area. And if you look at the study, that dives quite deep into how many units within the community, housing units, have access to which amenities. So we do a deeper dive into that.
When you do your study areas, I'm learning more, that's why I'm asking more questions. Do you make sure that you don't bisect a community? So, if you have, because I do not know these borders, if they're bisecting a community, some of the community is inside of the same community. They're inside the study area and some they're outside. And does it really matter that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think we definitely try to follow some sort of rationale of the way blocks are structured. It's hard to get granular on a qualitative level and see where people's neighborhoods are. In the focus groups, we did ask those questions. So we have a map which came from a mapping exercise, which goes beyond this map, and it's almost like a people's map of their own community. So I'm excited to share that in a few slides.
It's one way that you could do it is with HOA, borders of HOA that they have, because if you have an HOA that half of the community is there and half of the community is not, those community that are not, they're going to get concerned, or those community that they're going to talk to each other. So I do not know how you handle that and what is your policy in that regard.
Right. In this particular case, we were mostly interested in the concept of the complete community and the walk shed, along with those corridors and the properties along the corridors. So in some cases where you see those borders, those are specifically excluding existing master plans, because we didn't. So in the south, we are bordered on the Wheaton master plan and the study that was recently carried out on Wheaton. So we didn't want to go into that area on the western edge. This is the Weir's Mill corridor plan edge that you see here. So in some cases, I'm sure that there are neighbors who may wonder why I'm part of this and I'm not, but in some cases, these are borders which are borders that we have inherited from existing master plans. And so that kind of allows us to sort of frame these as kind of meaningful planning areas, if that makes sense.
So when you get comments from the community, do you get comments from the community that are just within the study area, or do you get people that are at the edge also?
We do get from
outside?
the edge also, yes. So
Okay.
we did for focus group recruitment, we did geofenced ad campaign. And as part of that ad campaign, we got clicks. And some members of the focus group were just outside the study area. They weren't excluded based on their geographic location. So quick recap of the study area demographics. We compared it to Montgomery County. This community is home to a substantial Hispanic/Latino population, making it one of the most culturally diverse communities in Montgomery County. Over half of the 26,000 residents of the study area identify as Hispanic or Latino, which is significantly higher than the county's share of approximately 20%. So, and even other populations, as you can see, are more or less, in similar ranges as the county overall, but the Hispanic Latino population is substantially higher for this particular study area. Along the same lines with the housing, we noticed there were a lot of comparisons between the county and the study area. The area does support, a sort of a suburban starter homes from the 1950s and 60s, and nearly 75% of housing units are single family. This includes single family attached, compared to the county's average of just under 66%. The area has a higher population of family households. That is where people from the same family unit are living within a house. And then the overall homeownership rates are also comparable to the county. So around Montgomery County is at about 66%, and it's roughly the same here. And this in spite of a substantially lower median household income at $94,000 roughly, which is 20% lower than the county's median income. So within this context, we wanted to analyze the 15-minute living idea. So I think we kind of stumbled upon, thanks to a planning conference, upon a methodology that we were excited to try. So with that, I'll move it to Louis.
Thank you, Zubins. For the record, my name is Louis Wang. I am a term planner in the direct office. So I would like to talk about the 15-minute living model, focusing on the criteria and the methodology behind it. So could you, yeah, here is mine. So to put it very simple, so we used multi-model network analysis in GIS to assess how people travel to key destinations using different transportation modes, including walking, biking, and using public transit. So we believe this method provides a powerful way to measure the accessibility, helping us understand whether the essential community amenities are within a reasonable travel time for residents. So in our study, in Glenmont, we actually follow the Thrive 2050 principles, which has defined the key amenities needed for a complete community. These are education institutions, healthcare facilities, shopping centers, parks, restaurants, and the religious place, all of which contribute to making neighborhoods more livable and convenient. So to conduct the 15 minutes living analysis, there are 4 key steps. So first, you can see the map on your upper right. We divide the Glenmont area into a grid of equal size cells, where each cell represents a specific location within study area. This helps us analyzing the accessibility in a structured way. So next, we assign the key amenities to each cell and measure how long it takes to reach them using different transportation modes, like the walking, biking, or public transit. This step allows us to compare accessibility level across different parts of the study area. So once we gather all this critical information, we built a multimodal network data set in GIS. This network simulates the real-world travel conditions and calculate the actual travel time between each origin and destination. So finally, we aggregate the results through mapping. As a map you can see on your bottom right, it is an example. The dark colors indicate a high accessibility, meaning the residents could easily reach the essential services within 15 minutes. On the other hand, areas with a very light color have limited accessibility, meaning people would need more time to reach the amenities. So as I said, the results give us the accessibility patterns. It helps us gain a clear understanding of which area provides residents with a more connected community or neighborhood versus which area lack accessibility. So those aggregate map on your left illustrate the distribution of their accessibility levels by walking, categorizing the area as having no, low, moderate, or high accessibility. So
These are by walking?
yes, by walking.
So this chart is just for walking. It's
Yes.
not for all the different modes. Okay.
No, this is just for walking mode. So in total, we can see, there is 15% of cells exceed the high accessibility, whereas 13% of cells have no access at all. So this is just focused on their spatial locations, but we care more about what's the people who living in the study area. So we overlaid with the housing unit data. We find out 15% of resident units, around 903 units, have high accessibility, whereas 11%, around 674 units, lack accessibility to essential service by walking. So similarly, we expand the overall analysis, including biking and using public transit. So it's a similar map as the last slide. So the map on your left illustrates the different level of accessibilities by colors. So again, overall, 59% of cells exhibit high accessibility, where 27% of cells have no access. So we also overlay the housing units. We could find that nearly 60% of the residential units benefit from the high accessibility, whereas only 11% of the housing units still lack any access to those essential services when they use biking or public transit. So, but these findings compared to the working mode is much better. So it's definitely highlighting the role of enhancing the connectivities and mobilities across the whole study boundary. So this 15-minute living model actually provides a valuable insight into the existing conditions of Glenmont. So there are three important takeaways. So first, we believe this study area has a high potential for mixed-use development, particularly in the area with high accessibility, such as those near the metro stations and the major intersections. These locations actually present significant opportunities for redevelopment that supports a mix of the residential, commercial, and community uses. So second, where public transit is available, pedestrian and biking infrastructure remains insufficient. There is a need for a better infrastructure, including continuous sidewalks and protected bike lanes. Assessing these gaps would enhance overall mobility and improve access to transit. So lastly, talking about public and green spaces, we have a common sense they play a very important role in creating inclusive urban environments. So our findings suggest that in creating the public spaces into community fabric would further promote a more equitable accessibility and also strengthens the community cohesion. So we also recommend encouraging the high-quality, inclusive urban design strategies that can further enhance the livability and the social interactions in the Glenmont area.
Can
So
I
now
ask you on the first one, mixed-use potential, you included major intersections. The reason you included major intersections because there are public transit there?
Yes.
Okay, I just didn't know exactly what was the reason. Okay, thanks.
yeah, this is pretty much about the 15 minutes living model, and passing it over to Zubin.
Thanks, Louis. So one of the key ways in which we engage with the community was through our focus groups. The focus group turned out to be a way of capturing community insights in a more concentrated, nuanced way. And what we found through the focus groups, we had around 8 focus groups, 6 of them with adults. 2 we conducted with some help from Identity Inc. In the high schools in the neighborhood during the summer programs, where we engaged with some younger participants. And what we found that there was a substantial overlap in the concerns and desires of people, regardless of what age group they fell into. So what we found was that residentials are attached to the community. They definitely care about it. They are concerned about safety when it comes to walking, biking, and transit. There is a desire for higher quality public spaces and retail, and residents are excited about any potential development. But of course, they want the development to be thoughtful and take into account their desires and needs. So they acknowledge that there is existing retail there, but they certainly are more interested in sort of retail that's higher quality and supports local businesses too. So at the end of the focus groups, over approximately 2-month process, we arrived at some strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats with the community. And what we noticed was that the people are, of course, attached to their community. They appreciate the strengths, which is the schools and supermarkets within a walking distance, which even our geographic information systems analysis, GIS analysis, kind of bears out. They do appreciate access to public transport, the parks, the diversity, and the overall environmental commitment is appreciated when it comes to whether it's Montgomery Planning or Montgomery Parks. And then Tacos Don Perez, which is a local taco truck, I call it the truck that has never moved, is considered a local landmark and a substantial asset there. When it comes to weaknesses, they point out that there is no clear identity to their area. And they find that there are some they lack safe routes to travel within their community, and some quality of the retail options leaves something to be desired. And then with the younger population, they mention hangout places. Their desires when it comes to hangout places are fairly elementary. The comparisons that they offer are even as simple as the sort of Aspen Hill shopping center, which is just north of them. They say, we'll take that in lieu of what we have. So their desires are fairly limited, but they also mention kind of generally maintenance issues with the shopping center and some code enforcement. So concerns like trash, et cetera, were raised. And then the threats, the community members did express concern about raising families, the rising cost of housing. And for our older residents, they mentioned that they were concerned about aging in place or aging in this neighborhood, given housing prices. They appreciate the environmental infrastructure that exists there. So for new developments, they're concerned if they're going to lose green cover, for instance, but they do want it. And then long-term challenges with Metro Rail are a concern that is tied in with the concerns about accessing the Metro Rail, and in some cases also ensuring that the metro stations are safe. And this was during the Red Line closure, so those concerns were at the forefront. Finally, with opportunities, we looked at the Glenmont Shopping Center. Everybody acknowledges that that site has immense potential, and any new housing growth that comes in, as long as it's thoughtfully planned, they are welcoming of that as an opportunity. And then people do realize this is, we didn't share the GIS results during the focus groups, we were still working on them, but even sort of the community members themselves realized that the overall area has a strong potential as a walkable community. So they acknowledge that the distances are limited. It's just the infrastructure that one has to travel along those distances that's difficult. So these were sort of the big insights that we got from the focus group. And as part of the focus groups, we also did a mapping exercise with the community members. So I'm going to do my best to kind of walk through this exercise here. What we did was we asked people to draw a map of their community or neighborhood, and then draw sort of their paths to the places that they frequently visit, whether by walking or driving or public transit. So the blue kind of areas that you see, and in some cases, people who have marked their homes to are their homes, and then what they perceive as their neighborhood. And the way we ask them to think about their neighborhood is either the place where you walk your dog, or or if you have a child, your stroller, and or if you do neither, then if you hear about a car break-in or something untoward happening, then you get concerned if it happens within that area. So as you can see, some of our focus group participants lived outside the study area, but they were still affected by it, or were interested in the study area. So one of the kind of key findings here was that walking and driving routes diverge. Walking routes are substantially limited. The areas that people consider their neighborhoods often abruptly end at major streets. So that kind of gives us the insight, which we already kind of know, which is that crossing major streets like Lay Hill or Georgia or Randolph is difficult, and they end up becoming these borders to communities that probably should not be there, which is sometimes just across the street, but it represents a significant barrier for people to perceive their community. And then, so if the convenient shopping center is just across the street, it still doesn't feel as if it's part of your community. And that's a concern that people pointed out to us during the focus group and the mapping exercise. As we were commencing the study, we were also informed that there was some informal economic activity in the form of food trucks and carts in the neighborhood. So we wanted to study that. We had a consultant on board who helped us with that, kind of looking at the informal and small business ecosystem in the area. They conducted interviews themselves with some of the vendors, including 2 informal vendors, plus conducted many site visits. So what we found was that we recognize that smaller vendors provide a substantial economic benefit in the community. They serve a diverse customer base, and also, of course, offer a health benefit because it's local cuisine within relatively safe walking distance for a lot of the community. And then on a social level, of course, it represents cultural diversity. There are different cuisine types that you can experience within that shopping center. And that diversity attracts a diverse customer base too. And of course, helps with neighborhood ties. Tacos Don Perez is like a local landmark for the community members there. So that was just one example. However, they also have some challenges within their area in that shopping center. Businesses mentioned concerns about homelessness, alcoholism, neighborhood safety concerns about violent crime, and some disruptive behavior, of course, and some impact on foot traffic and businesses from these issues. And there were other concerns for the more informal participants in the study, where people raised the idea of like minimal county government assistance and some gaps in services for smaller businesses. So we want to suggest that in the future, strategies should explore ways of supporting this. So between the 15-minute living analysis, our focus groups, this economic analysis, and we also had a questionnaire out there. We gathered a lot of feedback, kind of channeled that feedback through the lens of the existing master planning guidance that's available, and with the help of an illustrator, came up with a vision for the community of what's possible. So if you look at this image here, between guidance from all these sources and existing master planning guidance, we think that what is possible at this community could look something like this, and that includes some bus rapid transit on Georgia as well as Randolph roads, and we think that future bus stations, whether it's kiosks or locations, can support some commercial activity. We think there is the potential for the site to become a community hub and support activities which incorporate sort of green spaces with commercial activity. And overall, I think there's a lot of potential in this neighborhood that we think can be explored. We also looked at Georgia Avenue, especially this is that intersection where I'm completely blanking on the street at this point, but this is where H Mart is on this side, and we think that with bus rapid transit as well as some activation of spaces and we can reimagine this as a destination and not just a place of thoroughfare. And then we can have, apart from sort of the major nodes, such as those at the intersection of Randolph and Georgia, there are other smaller nodes in the area which can become attractive destinations for communities with a cluster of amenities and public spaces. Finally, we also envision Randolph as supporting diverse housing typologies, and then with some dedicated spaces for walking, biking, and rolling, and of course driving, and with some landscape buffer which separates people from cars. So these are kind of the ideas that we collected through our analysis and through our conversations with the community in the focus groups. So finally, with all of that, we kind of want to reiterate our stance, which is that this study aligns with Thrive's policies and practices. So we formulated strategies for future plans and policies and investments which are in alignment with Thrive and focus on that central idea of complete communities, and meaningfully addresses elements which are critical to Glenmont's future. So with that, if you look at these strategies that we have here, they more or less mimic the chapter structure of Thrive itself. And we think that this is an opportunity to kind of locally apply the insights and the guidance that Thrive provides us. So for the complete communities and advocating sort of mix of uses and urban forms, we think this is an area where we can meaningfully advance 15-minute living community model. Central to this is creating a central civic green that may be a privately owned public space, which is also supported by the robust and already present infrastructure that Montgomery Parks has in the area. And we can also support local retail and housing options. When it comes to the corridors, we think that the principles of corridor-focused growth can be applied here meaningfully with prioritizing housing diversity strategies along corridors first. And then this can become a catalyst for strengthening Glenmont's identity through placemaking interventions along those corridors, while at the same time ensuring safe multimodal access for the community. When it comes to transportation, of course, Vision Zero, we think, can be a primary guiding force here with improved bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, enhanced transit services and amenities, expanding sidewalks and walkabilities, and then safe routes to the schools in the neighborhood and parks. So school children that we spoke with will often walk along the corridors to get to the shopping center. There's a McDonald's there. So I think enhancing those routes and their safety and their desirability can meaningfully change how people experience the neighborhood. Finally, when it comes to housing, we support strategies which will support mixed income and affordable housing through redevelopment and expanding housing typologies, again, especially along the corridors too. With parks, we think that parks or green spaces rather, with central, we support creating a central civic green as part of the new development that we hope someday comes to the Glenmont Shopping Center, expand overall existing connectivity to parks, and then some economic activity in and around parks can meaningfully change how people experience the existing park infrastructure that is there. Finally, the study has strategies which supports incorporating green infrastructure in the area. Finally, with a focus on equity, we think that there should be continued engagement for any future efforts with underrepresented communities. This area is extremely diverse, and we have an opportunity to meaningfully reach out to people in this area, and then equitable access to services, sustaining community feedback, and then finally having urban design strategies that allow for small businesses and meaningfully can formalize the informal businesses that exist in the community. So with that, the sort of big piece that ties it together is, of course, economic competitiveness for the area. It should be supportive of redevelopment for small informal enterprises, acknowledge the unique identity of the shopping center, and enhance kind of business longevity and the community engagement for this area, which will be done through supporting flexibility and opportunities for small vendors. And then we finally end with some specific strategies within the study for the shopping center.
Okay, I just want to ask a question about your last bullet.
Yes, sure.
That shopping center, I'm assuming is Glenmont Shopping Center, is an eyesore. And since I remember, they have been trying to do something about it. And because my understanding is that there are multiple ownership, they haven't been successful. It's years. Or different, what I have heard that different developers and different people, different studies, and it has not gotten anywhere. So I'm hoping that we don't use the strategies that we have been using before and it has not worked. We need to come with something new, and maybe government has to step in and do something, because we have been waiting a long time. That's a big piece of land, it's right next to the metro, and it's complete an eyesore, and nobody can come to agreement what they have to do with it, and it has been sitting there for years, nothing happening. So I'm hoping when you come back with the strategies to be something new, and maybe one of them could be that the government county steps in and do something to make it happen. So just innovative ideas, I hope you can come up with.
I think one of the things that hopefully the study has been able to do is we have been able to set forth a vision that has at least some community buy-in in spite of the limits of what community engagement is as part of a study. But what we have also found through this is that the sentiments that you express are exactly the sentiments of that community, which is they see this potential. So it seems like there's a community that's ripe in terms of inviting some kind of development in that neighborhood. But yes, the fragmented ownership of that
it's not
site,
in the hands of the community. It's in the hands of a few owners that they cannot come to agreement what to do. That's what I'm hearing, okay? So I know that community wants it, everybody wants it, but there are a few owners that is not happening. So that's what I'm saying, that government has probably to get in and to do something about it to make it happen. I don't know, I'm not very familiar. These are the things that I have been hearing all the time, and it hasn't got anywhere. Just having a vision is not enough when we cannot make it happen. It has been many years that nobody has been able to bring everyone together to come up with something. A lot of different attempts has happened and it has not been successful. So we have to do something different.
I'd like to second Commissioner Petalweem's comments. Thanks.
Yeah, we just have one more slide, so we request that you, you know, I think you've already provided us with good guidance here, but I think we request that you sort of forward this to County Council for their briefing, and hopefully these strategies will make a difference in the community.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I see a lot of work went into it. This 15-minute model was very, I'm glad you did it, very informative. What I'm just going to also second Vice Chair Petalweem's comment is that, so maybe the next step is, well, asking you, what is needed to jumpstart or accomplish the vision, right? What is needed, and are there either on the private side or the public side? And then do you see any, if you had to do you see any low-hanging fruit there? What could, are some things there? So I know you can respond now, but I'm just saying, yeah, given not much has happened, what do you think is needed to make this vision happen?
Yeah, I think, I can speak to the low-hanging fruit, and then some higher fruits, I'll look higher than on this. I think the sort of low-hanging fruit here is how engaged and well-informed and sophisticated the community is. During the focus groups, it felt like being in a room full of planners at some points, because the community was very aware of the issues. We weren't telling them anything new. There were some community members who came there with a great level of awareness of even existing plans and policies from the county. So, I would sort of go back to the focus groups and say that these were people who were recruited after, I think we received a few hundred applications. So from there, we narrowed it down, and mostly based on sort of geography and diversity, to a certain number. So I think the community is excited and sort of awake to the potential of their own community. So I think they can make more things happen in some cases than we can. So if as a department we continue engagement with them, I think we can see some progress on those levels. One example that doesn't show up in the study is one of the residents came to us and said that the WSSC water tower doesn't look great. I think I want to do something with it. We put her in touch with WSSC. We got on a phone call with them, and they were more receptive to actually doing some beautification work on that in participation. Of course, expectations were set to realistic levels, but it's still moving forward. So I think this is just one community member doing this. So I think if we can meaningfully engage the community members, the existing master planning effort has enough resources and policies built within it, paired with this study and Thrive, that we can see meaningful change. But,
if I may, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair Petalweem, we completely agree with you that there has to be something that happens here because of the private ownership. Makes it a little bit challenging. We do know that the county has recently, I think they're working on acquisition of a piece of property there as well. And we do know that we've had a lot of interest in that in the recent 2 years, I think, the last 2 years, to try and consolidate the property. So there's a lot of interest. It's going to take the county, it's going to take private development to make that happen. And I think we do point that out in the study, but we also point it out, I think, in a lot of the work that we've been doing. And I think we're open to any kind of suggestions on how to kind of move that ahead. But I think the ownership structure is challenging. And I know that some of the individuals that We're looking at redevelopment there. We're looking at possibly doing it in kind of segmented pieces, but I don't know where that stands right now.
Yeah, that's the problem. And I think I'm very happy to see that, county is trying to acquisition. I do not know if there is any way we could do eminent domain or something. Is that a possibility? I don't know, but these properties needs to be developed.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah,
this study will not be recommending eminent
I
domain.
know, I know, I know. I'm just saying that. I shouldn't have said that, but there is something that government can step in to help to make it happen. I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the things we can control from the planning board's perspective, I don't know what you think about this, but, this past year when you did the placemaking up in Damascus.
That's true.
That helped kind of energize, the council members' interest in, and so I was wondering if maybe, that could be at least a first step from our point, just to galvanize some interest at a higher level. And then, yep, Gary, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we do sort of recommend placemaking strategies and sort of intermediate term interventions in the study. So yeah, this is ripe for some placemaking. There is an existing community here that's already doing their bit, so I think we can come in and buttress those efforts meaningfully through a more formal placemaking intervention that could be very successful.
Well, and I think as we look at our strategic plan for placemaking, this can be one of the top ones that we can look at in terms of next events or next activities that would really promote what they're suggesting.
Yeah, but I'm just delighted you did this. It's bringing more awareness of it, and especially at a great location, and that the community should get more, and thank you. And any other questions or
Yeah, I
comments?
just have a comment. I really love that design that you put up with the completed community at the intersection of Randolph and Georgia. Something needs to be done there, and the rendering that you gave is amazing, and the potential in that site is also amazing. Just from my own recollection, I think there was Country Boy Farm Market or something like that. I think they've sold it, or they're in the process of selling it and getting it redeveloped. So there are some owners there that are on board with, realizing a better community and use of that space. And then you also have the Lidl supermarket, and if I'm not mistaken, a fitness gym near there. And so there are people that are interested in redeveloping that area and living up to the standards that we expect of Montgomery County landowners, especially those who own large lots of land. But the rendering you gave is spectacular, and I'm hopeful that the landowners there take the initiative in the comments of Commissioner Pedaween and do something before the county has to do something. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off that. These illustrations, I think, we talk a lot about corridor planning, and sometimes I think it feels a little bit, not exactly vague, but it's difficult to imagine how it all comes together because there's so many different pieces, and illustrations like this just go so far, and I think, and not just with the community, but I think us up here, like imagining, what does this mean in terms of livability, moving through the area, living in the area, and I imagine that these kinds of renderings are, take a lot of time and effort and thoughtfulness and collaboration with the whole team. And so it's easy for me to say this, but I would love to see more of these with other corridor planning efforts. It would have been so fantastic to see this with like University Boulevard, for example, and have that part of community conversations. And the engagement with University Boulevard was great. And this is nothing but about the effort, but the visioning, what this allows in terms of imagining a positive future, and taking it from a place of uncertainty to a positive vision is really powerful. And yeah, I definitely look forward to seeing more of these and hope we can sort of integrate them into a lot of our conversations. So thanks for this, and thanks for all of your work on the study.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, great. So yeah, you hear all the great comments about your great work, the renderings which help tell a story, and we're all about that, and maybe the using of placemaking and really impressing upon, how do we jumpstart to make this the great vision that you've laid out here. So thank you so much. We'll take a 3-minute break, and then we'll start with our last item of the day, which is item 5, More Housing Now, New Options for Workers package.
Are you, Mr. Chair, are you
Oh,
asking?
yeah, well, we got to, wait, I'm sorry, we forgot to vote to submit this to the county council. So do I have a motion to transmit to the county council this Glenmont Corridors Opportunity Study?
Yeah, move to transmit the Glenmont study to the county council.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Thank you. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Good afternoon. We're on our last item of the day. It's item number 5, More Housing Now, New Options for Workers Package, where Mr. Ben Burbett and Lisa Gavoni will present this item this afternoon. We're very, very interested in your presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the introduction. My name is Ben Burbett with the Countywide Planning and Policy Team, and as alluded, we are going to be giving our analysis and recommendations for the More Housing Now package. This package contains 2 ZTAs, an SRA, a bill, as well as some other funding mechanisms. Our base recommendation is that we want to transmit comments supporting Bill 2-25, and that we would like the board to transmit comments supporting, but with amendments to ZTA 2502, 2503, and SRA 2501. As sort of a background to the background, I'm going to give a brief introduction of the package and all of the kind of contents within it. Just briefly summarize the public testimony that we've received so far, and then I'm going to recommend opening it up to let the people signed up to speak go ahead and have a chance to testify before we get into our analysis. The reason being there's so much analysis to get through, I think it would actually help the board to know what the concerns are rather than waiting to the end to hear them. And then we're going to just try to knock off each recommendation as we go through, more like a work session probably that you're used to. So this package was introduced, co-introduced by council members Friedson and Fanny Gonzalez back on February 4th of 2025. And it has a number of co-sponsors, including the Council President Stewart, as well as council members Lutke, Balcom, and Sales. And there is a council public hearing scheduled for next Tuesday, March 11th. I believe there's actually 2 time sessions for that, one at 1:30 in the afternoon and another one happening, I believe at 7 or 7:30, starting 7 or 7:30 at night. This package, it's, as I said, it's a package of 2 ZTAs, an SRA bill, and some funding. It has the main goal of trying to create more affordable housing, particularly for the middle class and for sort of public service workers, trying to extend pathways for more homeownership opportunities in the county, as well as offering payment in lieu of taxes or a pilot program for developers of certain commercial to residential projects, as well as opportunity fund assistance programs for residents looking to actually move into one of these projects. The first ZTA is part of this, ZTA 2502, Workforce Housing Development Standards. This is really trying to accelerate the construction of workforce housing. It does this primarily by creating a new optional method, workforce housing of development, that would be applicable in 4 zones, the R200, R90, R60, and R40 zones. And it would be specific to properties in those zones that have their frontage on an identified set of streets that have at least 3 travel lanes in width and a master plan right-of-way of 100 feet. This would be an approval through site plan. There would be a 15% workforce housing requirement through any development approved through this new optional method of development. And sort of the other big thing that this ZTA does is it creates a new building type for triplex that would be eligible through the new optional method of development, as well as added to all of the other zones where duplex and townhouse are currently allowed, just to provide a little bit more flexibility in our existing optional methods of development. The next ZTA that's part of this package, ZTA 2503, expedited approval, commercial to residential reconstruction. This is really trying to address our commercial and office vacancy that we have in the county by providing options for new residential developments that are not currently allowed. One of the first things that this does is it creates a new commercial to residential reconstruction use. It also allows in existing employment zones opportunities for any application to potentially reallocate commercial FAR to residential FAR, so long as you're not exceeding the total mapped FAR or height. And it also is making some changes to what we kind of call the expedited review plans by consolidating the 3 existing plan types now under one new expedited review plan, and then adding the commercial and to residential reconstruction use as a 4th option for this new expedited plan. Bill 2-25, payment in lieu of taxes for affordable housing. This primarily is altering the payment in lieu of taxes or the pilot program to add commercial to residential reconstruction as eligible for it. It would exempt 100% of real property taxes for 25 years. Applicants in this program would have to provide at least 15% affordable units and have a control period of at least 25 years that these units be priced at 60% or less of the area median income. And again, looking at the sort of funding that is part of this program, again, there's a new Workforce Housing Opportunity Fund valued at $4 million that's being offered that would help incentivize construction of workforce housing units around the county. And then there's a homeowners assistance program that would double the amount in the program, or otherwise called the HIF, from $4 million to $8 million. And this provides loans and grants to help create and preserve existing affordable housing. We're talking about workforce housing a lot. You don't hear it very often. You much more commonly hear moderately priced dwelling units or MPDUs. Workforce housing is another type of controlled housing that's really aimed at the next level up of income. MPDUs, we're usually looking in that 60 to 70% of AMI. Workforce housing is for 70 to 120% of AMI. The table on the screen here really just shows that by household size, what's sort of that maximum income that would be eligible for a workforce housing unit product. Something that we address in the staff report and we also want to make sure is addressed here is how this does and doesn't relate to our efforts on corridor planning. And this is particularly tied to ZTA 2502, which is doing the optional method of workforce housing that is focused along some corridors. And I think staff does recognize this as a step in achieving more development along our corridors, but this really should not be at all looked at as a substitute for corridor planning. You know, our corridors and our growth corridors, we really think of these as the ones that were identified through Thrive Montgomery 2050. You know, when we think of corridor planning, we're really trying to do contextual recommendations. You know, we do a full analysis of existing conditions. We do outreach to the community. We do economic analysis. We look at infrastructure needs, you know, if this were to be built out. And it allows us to actually have recommendations that we feel confident can be made and that might actually take it further than what the ZTA would be taking from a density standpoint. Again, we're really trying to tie higher density to help support our transit that are envisioned in these corridors. It you know, provides that opportunity to actually re-envision places more than a zoning text amendment can. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is build a relationship between land uses, building form, and transportation to improve safety and walkability, as well as just the economic vitality of these areas. And so for all these reasons and many more that I can't mention today, we just want to make sure that this is not, shouldn't be seen as, well, this is now done corridor planning. I think we definitely want to push back on that narrative a little bit. When it comes to the correspondence we've seen, most of it has come in a little bit negative on this package. It's a little hard to tell because most of the correspondence we've gotten have just been sort of focused on the now package. Some of this feels like it's probably a little more tailored to one ZTA or the other, but not wanting to assume anything, we've just gone ahead and left this as a group. We've definitely heard concerns over environmental impacts of more intense development. This could lead to a lower quality of life, increasing traffic congestion, that there's a chance this could lead to increased taxes on residents. There's definitely some concern in a couple of correspondence that some of these recommendations might be harmful to businesses, particularly in the NR zone, which is really designed to help small businesses. There's an opposition to any reductions in parking. There's a desire to make sure that we potentially amend the ZTAs to prohibit ancillary uses in these residential zones, prohibit short-term residential rentals from being an option in these zones, prohibit digital density bonuses. Concerns came up about property frontage and service roads and whether or not those should be eligible properties for this development. You know, concerns about APF, concerns about the pilot periods too long, you know, otherwise a general desire to maintain sort of existing single-family neighborhoods, whether there's really even a need for additional housing considering the impacts of federal layoffs on our region, whether, you know, we should be controlling whether these are rental or ownership units, concern about whether or not multiple properties can be consolidated to make larger developments. And, you know, what support we did here was that they support some of the climate assessment recommendations for more stringent stormwater management and flexibility in tree plantings. It's a lot of very different types of correspondence. They also should be in your packet as written form. I think this is the point I'd like to maybe break and recommend we hear from the people who have signed up to speak today.
Can I make just one quick question about just the correspondence specifically? What, all of these were in the packet we received, right? All of this correspondence. So just want to clarify that the correspondence we received was a handful of letters from largely, it seemed like the Chevy Chase areas, the towns, the sections, compared to many other initiatives that we've done or that have been proposed by council. This was actually a relatively small correspondence package. And I just want to make it clear that although, these concerns were listed, this is certainly not representative of the entire county, and it also isn't even representative geographically, much less demographically, of much outside of kind of that one part of the county. So I just, although this is a long list, the correspondence package was, in terms of the actual number of letters, relatively small.
Yeah, I will say it did, there was another maybe concentration of things that we did receive from the University Boulevard Corridor Plan because it's an ongoing initiative, and I think those community members are a little more active, but I would agree that it's those two pockets were where most of the correspondence came from.
And in that vein, I just wanted to give a little public service announcement. And Ben did mention that the county council is having their public hearings, 2 public hearings next Tuesday. I'm confirming that it is at 1:30 and at 7 p.m. And anyone who would like to sign up for that, you can go to the council's website at montgomerycountymd.gov/council/testify.html. And the deadline to sign up to participate in those in that either of those public hearings is Monday at 2 p.m. So I think we have seen a lot of times with a lot of ZTAs, a lot of people tend to wait until the council work session or public hearing to provide testimony. But I agree, it wasn't an overwhelming number of
Yeah, and I
amount of
agree. I
correspondence.
think that a lot of the comments, because this is ZTA from the county council, may go directly to the county council. Yeah.
So, great. Thank you for your comment there, which is very, very accurate. And thank you about the public service announcements for next week. So we have 6 people or groups to present testimony on More Housing Now, 1 in person and 5 online. So we'll take the 1 person in person, Britt Yitzhak. And maybe he's outside here. Can you check, Mr. Sharma? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, thank you. You have 3 minutes, and please.
First, thank you all again for holding this hearing and allowing the public to speak. I really appreciate the time. I am going to get right to business, as I only have 2 minutes and 50 seconds left.
Could you announce your name, please?
Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Britzi Montov. I live in Kent Mill and have been for about 8 years. And I have 4 kids. And we heard about this plan not too long ago. I wanted to know why we haven't. We only found out about the plan a couple weeks ago. Most of us are just scrambling together, trying to figure out what this means and what this will mean for us. After doing a lot of research, all of us, I will say that the data is extremely unclear. We have done so much research, all of us, making phone calls, unlimited amount of Google searches, and nothing. We are very concerned that a plan on this scale has not been, the data has not been made public and easy to access. I hear a lot of abatement this, abatement that. We have the 25-year abatement. DC has the 40-year abatement. Who is going to pay for that? Where is their money coming from? Is it coming from our taxes? Because I'm truly concerned that it will be. And right now, I'm considered middle class, and according to your AMI for 147K of a family of only 2, I mean, we're making that, we're a family of 6. Does that make us the lower class? But right now, I feel, and I'm pretty sure what's gonna happen if this plan does go through, is that my taxes will then have to go to pay for the lower class so that they can get housing. but then my housing gets to be taken away. I mean, we're working hard. We're working 9 to 5 every day. We have our 4 kids that we need to take care of at the end of the day. Now our taxes are going to be going to play for the lower class, and then we'll become the lower class so that they can become the middle class. I haven't been hearing a lot about this. Honestly, I feel discriminated against because I've been living here for 8 years, and I've been a working hard citizen. I've been contributing to my community, and they've been contributing back to the county. For us to not have any communication with the council or with the planning board and just finding out about this only a few weeks ago leaves us all very, very concerned indeed. So I would like to leave off with, maybe we can do better. If we really are by the people and for the people, is this really what we want? Are we listening to what the people want and what they have to say? Because if the people are coming out and they're saying we can't have this right now, we need to slow down and think about this plan because it's not been thought out and it has not been explained to the public, then we need to stop and do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is online, Cheryl Gannon with the Montgomery County Civic Federation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Gannon. I'm the president of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. The Civic Fed is a 100-year-old umbrella organization of neighborhood civics across the county. Our reach now is over 30,000 households. We have a strong commitment to a transparent and inclusive planning process that includes resident voice in the future of their own communities. We've had a series of speakers and extensive discussions about attainable housing and then this proposal. I will say that we're pleased to see a focus in this more housing package on workforce housing and also the conversion of vacant office buildings to housing, including affordable housing. Those are proposals that residents in the Civic Fed have endorsed over the years. We share concerns about affordability and economic equity, and we adopted a resolution a year ago with suggested strategies to improving availability and affordability for those most in need. With regard to climate impact, we appreciate the staff's proposal for non-waivable stormwater management on these sites, as we know that neighborhoods have faced increasing water issues. It's important to note here that this proposal is coming at a time when the county is facing massive job losses and the impact on housing is not yet known. Our members do have an overriding objection to the rush to move this proposal in light of the economic storm we're facing. I would like to highlight several areas of questions we have or concerns. And first is the role of master planning. We cannot determine if master planning is being phased out, and if so, we would oppose that. Making significant changes to a neighborhood works best through master planning, where specific features in an area can be taken into account, such as narrow roads, persistent stormwater management, parking, traffic, and ancillary uses. Please clarify the role of master planning in the future and also whether these corridors will undergo additional density proposals beyond the now proposal under corridor master plans. On the tax holiday for office conversions, we know that conversions can be costly and that some incentive may be warranted, but we have questions about the fiscal impact of a 25-year tax holiday and whether it's warranted across the board if affordable housing target is only 15%. I think it would be helpful to have a fiscal analysis and weigh the costs against expected output of new units, with serious considerations to the issues raised in the county's racial equity analysis. We will ask the council to increase the 15% target, and we would appreciate board support for that. It appears that the tax provision would apply when a commercial building is demolished. If that's correct, we would oppose that. The conversion challenges of a building that was built for a non-residential use may be significant, but simply knocking a building down and putting up something else does not include those same challenges. The county's racial equity analysis of the tax holiday contains important issues regarding winners and losers and impact on communities of color that must be factored into the decision-making in the ultimate package. The impact on infrastructure and schools must be evaluated accurately, and funding for the improvements must move forward at the same time as developments. School crowding has been an issue for so long in this county that the existing formula for calculating impact on schools must be improved. We question why the focus is not on incentivizing and prioritizing high-yield possibilities for housing, such as White Flint and Pike and Rose and commercial spaces off New Hampshire Avenue. Our members are rightfully asking why it's necessary to make these incursions into established neighborhoods while sites with large capacity languish. In downtown Silver Spring alone, there are approvals or opportunity sites to build the equivalent of 3 Pike and Rose developments, There are 35,000 units in the pipeline right now, and while many of those approvals may be old, some have asked for amendments in recent years, indicating ongoing interest. We do appreciate the fact that the planning has begun the process of investigating those approvals and why they haven't moved forward, but we think the areas with the greatest potential should be the first and current focus. On lot assemblage, there's been conflicting information about lot assemblage, and this is important. Councilmember Friesman has stated that these developments will not extend further into neighborhoods than the parcel that fronts the corridor identified on the map. Language clarifying that is important, and I would ask that you convey that to the council. Clarification of horizontal assemblage is needed as to whether rezoning several parcels to one larger parcel allows for removing the setbacks on individual parcels and constructing larger buildings. That needs to be clarified as well. We request clarity about entrances and exits to corridor developments and how traffic cut through a neighborhood can be mitigated. On blocks where the corridor parcel backs up to another block of homes without a street between them, will there be alleys or service roads constructed between? It might help to have a pattern book, as the state will be resistant to curb cuts on state roads like Georgia Avenue. Residents on interior blocks are rightfully concerned that their backyard may look out on a parking lot soon, or an alley, or information about how this might be mitigated would be helpful, including maybe service roads in front of the developments. We also ask that the map of eligible properties remove homes on service roads, as they do not have 3 traffic lanes or 100 feet. There are also schools and libraries on the map, and this has caused concerns. The staff suggestion to reduce parking to 1 unit per household is problematic, particularly if ancillary commercial uses like daycare and dental offices will be allowed. It's likely that parking will spill over onto streets in older neighborhoods. Not every neighborhood is built for that. Recent experience at the Ava, for example, points to this problem. All of this points to the importance of site plan review of every parcel, and we ask that you not drop the site plan process for single parcels. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. And next is Cheryl Steisel-Weiss.
Hello, I am Sherry Steisel-Weiss, president of the Lux Manor Citizens Association, representing almost 900 households in Lux Manor, Windermere, and the Oaks. Many streets, especially ones along the proposed corridor of development, were initially created in the 1930s. Lux Manor is bounded by Executive Boulevard, Old Georgetown Road, and I-495. In 2021, Hurricane Ida resulted in an extraordinary amount of water falling within our community, and the resulting damage costs to property were in the millions. Had any person or pet been in their basement at the time of the storm, the force of the water entering these homes would have been deadly. As a result, this incident in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is conducting an ongoing hydrologic and hydraulic studies. FEMA flood zone maps are being readdressed as a result of this event. 7 properties have been identified along Old Georgetown Road with the potential to be workforce housing sites under ZTA 2502. We anticipate several vacant buildings along Executive will be opportunities for conversion to workforce housing under ZTA 2503. We thank the housing staff for assisting with our comprehension of this very complex package. ZTA 2502 is problematic for property owners who currently reside along these proposed properties for additional density development. Climate adaptation developmental standards are not addressed in the ZTA. There are no standards for 3 or 4 unit multiplexed buildings. We concur with planning staff recommendations for code changes, ZTA changes, or other enforceable mechanisms that will require control of stormwater runoff. We concur with planning staff that more stringent standards are needed to support the CAP. Our community lives constantly with the damaging effect of stormwater runoff. Our WSSE transmission infrastructure is continuously breaching, creating potential for severe underground implosions of the transmission lines. Stormwater management waivers must also be banned. We concur with the planning staff recommendations to assist the potential need for code changes, ZTA changes, or other enforceable mechanisms as appropriate to develop new, more stringent standards regarding stormwater management for this type of development to support the rationale underlying the CAP. Doing so would go a long way in mitigating stormwater quantity, flooding, and water quality negative impacts that would otherwise result from ZTA 2502. Tree canopy regulations must be retained. Under the Cap Carbon Sequestration Act S2, retain and increase tree canopy, applicants who trigger this law prefer to pay off-site fee rather than replacing the trees they have removed on the site as a result of the development. Reduction of tree canopy provisions are highly problematic for a community like ours that is already flood prone. We agree with staff's suggestions for code changes, ZTA changes, or other enforceable mechanisms to reduce tree spacing in the right-of-way and reduce the open air requirements on private lots to lessen tree canopy loss. Our neighborhood is made up of narrow streets, which date back to the 1930s construction standards. Both Tilden Middle School and Lux Manor Elementary School are located along these streets, resulting in parking challenges for events and massive traffic backups during school hours. We understand the logic of the staff reduction of parking space proposal from 2 to 1 to assist with stormwater management for impervious surfaces. However, this reduction in parking will only contribute to more parking congestion on those narrow, antiquated streets. These ZTAs are lacking in provisions to address traffic. Old Georgetown Road has failed intersections along our community, and the newly built Woodward High School is located directly across the street from proposed blue zones for workforce housing development. Recently added bike lanes along Old Georgetown Road have added to the confusion and congestion and have constructively removed a lane of traffic from Old Georgetown Road, thereby putting into question the idea that this road is a three-way highway for the purposes of this proposed workforce corridor. The plots identified for workforce housing are opposite the new Woodward High School. To add another layer of concern, the proposed BRT route, which will effectively take away another lane of traffic on Old Georgetown Road, will reduce the notion of a 3-lane roadway in front of the proposed land development for workforce housing. We are trying to get our minds around how all of this traffic will work with additional curb cuts and additional residents, all trying to use Old Georgetown Road. Infrastructure issues must be addressed in the proposed ZTA. WSSC infrastructure is dilapidated and needs to be replaced to support all this development. In our community, we have endured multiple pipe failures in 2 WSSC transmission pipes. These WSSC redundant transmissions pipes, which are both larger than a car, are an extreme failure as denoted by WSSC and have required emergency patchwork, resulting in the shutdown of Tilden Lane. Also in recent years, the WSSC Blackwater raw sewage pipes that are located along the old Farm Creek have leached sewage into our community. So the health and safety of our neighborhood, school children and residents have been undermined by this situation. Both CTAs must have amendments that proactively address infrastructure prior to allowing any additional development to occur. I urge you to consider a ZTA 2503 amendment that requires a converted office building to address school capacity when a feeder school in the cluster is at 85%. Coordination between MCPS and planning is critical in communities with overcrowded schools. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next is Eliza Blumenfeld.
Good afternoon, members of the Montgomery County Planning Board. My name is Eliza Blumenfeld, and my family has lived in the Kent Mill community of Silver Spring for 10 years. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on the More Housing Now initiative. While I recognize the urgent need for more housing in our county, I have concerns about the feasibility and unintended consequences of this plan. First, I want to say that I agree that the housing crisis in Montgomery County is very real. Many workers, teachers, first responders, healthcare professionals, etc., struggle to find affordable housing in the county. The rising cost of home ownership and rental housing force many to either move further away or struggle financially. This initiative is a bold and commendable effort to address these challenges. However, while I appreciate the ambition behind this plan, I have serious concerns about its feasibility and potential impact, particularly regarding traffic congestion, affordability, and the quality of life for the communities it would affect. One of my primary concerns is the impact on infrastructure. Increasing housing density without significant infrastructure improvements, especially on major commuting routes, could exacerbate already severe traffic congestion, especially alongside lane reduction initiatives like the University Boulevard Corridor Plan. As housing units multiply, our roads, public transportation systems, schools, and public services will need to scale accordingly. Otherwise, residents will face longer commutes, overcrowded schools, and additional strains on essential services. Furthermore, this plan threatens to harm existing residents by displacing small businesses that serve our daily needs and fundamentally altering the character of our communities. While the proposal mandates that a minimum of 15% of units be MPDUs, the remaining 85% will be market rate, which will still be unaffordable for many families. Developers will prioritize higher income buyers and renters, limiting affordability for the very people this initiative is intended to help. Additionally, many working class families aspire to own single family homes rather than move into high density apartments. There are already vacant apartment units available across Montgomery County that remain unfilled. This raises the question, does this plan truly address the needs of those it claims to help, or does it simply benefit developers at the expense of existing communities? The county is offering financial incentives, 25-year tax breaks, expedited approval processes, and reduced restrictions to developers, while current residents will bear the burdens of construction interferences, increased congestion, and tax implications. I implore you to reconsider the locations and more thoroughly examine the plan by way of surveys and community engagement, and ensure that the initiative does not create chaos and hardship for current residents. Instead of pushing through a plan that prioritizes developers, we should be exploring balanced, sustainable solutions that protect existing communities while addressing housing needs in a way that truly serves working communities. The More Housing Now initiative is a step in the right direction, but boldness alone does not guarantee success. I hope that we can refine and improve this plan to truly meet the needs of Montgomery County's residents without creating additional unintended burdens. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much. Next is Jose Torres.
Good afternoon, Planning Board members and fellow county neighbors. My name is Jose Massini Torres. I live on Merwood Lane in the Woodmore neighborhood, a block from University Boulevard, with my wife, 2 young daughters, and a little dog. Our streets and homes would not be rezoned under 2502, but would be right up against the rezoned area. But I want to first start by addressing 2 points that came up during the introductory presentation and remarks. One being that the correspondence package may possibly be small because people, and I know my neighbors, are having a really hard time keeping track of all the concurrent rezoning plans. And it's led to the perception for many that there are so many multiple concurrent and partly overlapping zoning plans to create confusion, reduce responses, and exhaust opposition. And 2, that the idea that county dollars could be given to tax subsidies to big developments at a time when homeowners' property taxes recently went up strikes many as especially egregious. To myself, first, it's my understanding that the push for rezoning is moving ahead before the state can complete its impact assessment on a road, for example, University Boulevard. There may be other similarly situated roads. And I think this is crucial information that would give better planning insight onto what may or may not be feasible on major corridors, what may or may not be permissible. And the county should not move forward without getting that kind of impact assessment, either its own or from the state on affected roads. Second, Merwood Lane is a common path for neighbors exercising, walking dogs, children playing, Blair students. It does not have sidewalks. What makes the road relatively safe is that most residents park off the street and that there's a limited amount of traffic on it. But the kind of rezoning that would affect it under the 2502 fails to account for that increase in nearby traffic and parking demands and how those would affect the walkability and safety of residential streets like ours. And a much larger volume of cars will be parking and cutting through them. And additionally, more traffic along major roads before there's a comprehensive infrastructure update to facilitate it and to improve public transit, it's going to have a brutal effect on the commute that people presently undertake, especially now with the reduction in telework that has happened across many industries. If my commute, long as it is, gets even longer, the amount of time I'll have to spend with my family every night will be minimal. Third, I'm living my dream of owning a single family home. It's why we left DC. But that goal should not be confused. And the goal of making housing attainable for all should not be confused with rezoning that defers to the market and is likely to produce rental properties. That's a mindset of, affordable housing is a house for me to own and an apartment for you to rent. Finally, having previously rented in other areas of DC and Maryland, I can say that the way it often ends up is that what you pay in a monthly rent for an apartment is not that much different from the mortgage payment on a single family home. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Torres. That ends our testimony. Thanks, everyone, for participating. We always appreciate your input. Thank you. So we'll go back to Mr. Berber and let you take us through the more detailed analysis, okay?
All right, thank you for that. Up first, we are going to talk about ZTA 2502, the Workforce Housing Optional Method ZTA. And again, I've structured this to sort of roughly follow with the staff report, which roughly follows with the actual ZTAs themselves. I'm going to assume silence or head nodding means you support whatever we're talking about as a way to get through these quickly. First section of this ZTA is an amendment to the defined terms section, adding the triplex building type. Staff does recommend, and we'll talk about a little bit later, that the addition of triplex building type needs to be actually addressed in two separate sections of code, one for the residential zones and one for the commercial and mixed-use zones. And so we are recommending the triplex building type reference, but making sure both of these code sections are referenced.
Great. I'd just like the board members to just stick your finger up and you can know where, and we'll keep going, okay?
All right. The next amendment in this ZTA is to the use table. It updates the multi-unit living from a conditional use only in the R200, R90, R60, and R40 zones to a limited/conditional use in those 4 zones. And this is so that it can facilitate allowing small multi-family projects as part of that optional method of development we discussed, and we do support this change. The next kind of section of code that is not actually amended by the ZTA, and it's actually an omission that we think needs to be addressed, is that there actually is no household living use for triplex buildings. In the code, we really identify things both as a use and a building type. Duplexes are 2-unit living as a use. Townhouses is a townhouse living as a use. Triplex buildings are what as a use? And so what this really wants to be, if it follows the pattern, is to have something called either 3-unit living, which is sort of one option that we were recommending, just adding a new section 331D, 3-unit living, is 3 dwelling units in a triplex building type. The alternative option that this could be done through is to amend multi-unit living to either be 3 units in a triplex or more than 3 units in an apartment or multi-use building. Both would work. If we did 3-unit living as a new use, it would need to be added to the use table in section 316. It would need to be added to the parking table and a couple of other places as identified, and the standards would need to be filled out. If we were to amend multi-unit living and just add triplex as a building type, it can happen in. There would be a different set of amendments to the use table and parking table to accommodate this. And so, we could pick an option. I think staff also thinks we could just give both to council and they could decide. I think really it doesn't make much of a difference to us. It just needs to be addressed one way or the other, and we can work with council staff on how we actually implement it. And so our recommendation is to just transmit both options to the council here. Next section of code amends the building types that are allowed in the agricultural, rural residential, and residential zones. This section of code has the different definitions for the building types as well as a little pretty picture of what they look like. This is adding a new building type called triplex, which would be defined as containing 3 dwelling units that could be separated vertically or horizontally by a party wall and may contain ancillary non-residential uses. These things could include a home occupation or a small daycare up to 12, not students, but 12 children. The other change that's happening to this section of code are a couple performative ones. Because we're having a new triplex building type, townhouses would go from being 3 units to 4 units or more in a townhouse building type, and the multi-family or apartment building type would be going from 3 to 4 or more. Another change being made is specifying that the 10% gross floor area that's allowed for retail or service in the apartment building type would not apply to the R200, 90, 60, or 40 zones, but only apply to the multifamily and mixed-use zones. That's being added because we are, if this goes through, allowing the apartment building type to also happen in those residential zones in this new optional method of development. And we're trying to make sure that we're not allowing commercial to then also slip in these areas. That was not the intent of the ZTA. And so staff is supporting all of this sort of package of changes. The one thing we are recommending is that the reference to commercial, residential, and employment zones in the apartment building definition here that was added by the ZTA actually be removed. The reason for this is there's a whole another section that we're going to talk about next, where all the building types are redefined for how they interact with the mixed use and employment zones. And so this provision really isn't applicable here because this is just the wrong section of code to even add this. Immediately following that section is a sort of a matrix table that helps explain the different types of buildings that are allowed and by what zone and by what method of development. The zoning text amendment is adding sort of triplex as well as the sort of key for workforce housing into the table. The one thing that it does do is it's doing it as adding triplex or townhouse as a new column. I think for cleanness and consistency, staff really thinks that triplex should just be added as its own column here. And then you would populate the applicable standards, the MPDU, the workforce housing, and as appropriate by zone. And so we're just recommending that change be made. All right, next section of code, and this is another one that was not actually included in the ZTA, and we think it was just a drafting oversight. This talks about the buildings that are allowed in the commercial, residential, employment, and industrial zones. Again, the triplex building type really needs to be added here because the rest of the ZTA does propose triplexes being allowed as an optional method in some of these employment and mixed-use zones. And so again, we would take the same definition for triplex that was shown in the previous section. It would just be added here as a new C. The townhouses would go from C to D, apartments from D to E. And this is also would make the change from 3 to 4 or more dwellings as appropriate.
Can I jump in with a quick question just on on redefining the townhome and the triplex and the apartments? It's not going to then affect the ability to build a townhome style in any of these. You know, I mean, a triplex can be essentially a townhome style building with just 3 of them, right? But I'm thinking for the other ones, I mean, we're not with this approach to changing the definition, we're not minimizing the ability to build a larger townhome style in any of our zones, are we?
No, and okay. In fact, some of the development standards that we'll discuss later were kind of specifically done in a way to acknowledge that we actually have a lot of 3-unit townhouses out there now.
Yeah, there's not a fair
and
number. That
this conversion to a triplex actually being a unique thing doesn't sort of break what we already have built.
Yeah.
So,
and just for another quick, I mean, now you know what? Offline question. I'll ask about it later because is it easier? My one question is it easier just to address the number of units per lot rather than redefine everything, or is that going to be too complicated given the fact that we've already got a fairly extensively confident Jason is nodding, and that's because I figure he's pretty much anticipated it and knows where I'm going. But like, yeah, we're adding a lot of complexity to an already incredibly complex zoning, like, chapter. I mean, it's intense, and this is making it not poorly, but more complicated. And I don't know if there's ways to recommend that they simplify this somewhat, but I don't know if that's possible given the way that it's put together.
I would say I would love to simplify this, but I think a more holistic approach needs to be taken, and it's not just a new optional method of development and a new building type. There's a whole bigger conversation I think we need to have about making this work better.
All right, just wanted to put a marker note there. Thanks.
And similarly to the section of adding this, we also then on 4.1.6 is another matrix table, just like we had for the residential zones, but it's for the employment and commercial residential zones, also laying out that we would add a triplex column. And in that case, they'd all be allowed because those zones would just allow triplexes anyway. So that change would happen. Next section of the ZTA, we've worked our way into the rural residential zones. The only change here is that in the RNC zone, which is a very unique zone for our rural areas, it does allow townhouses and duplexes now. They're adding triplex. In most of these places where they're adding triplex, they have, again, added it as triplex or townhouse. I will say staff's initial reaction to that was that it really, again, should be treated more consistently. You know, we talked to council staff, and I think this is where they stepped in and said, well, there are so many 3-unit townhouses now that we want to make sure that the townhouse and the triplex standards are mirroring each other so that we don't create a conflict with the existing development. And so I think to the extent that that's how it's being envisioned, staff's okay for the existing zones to add it this way now. I think if it turns out that it's not working, that can be dealt with through a future ZTA. It just wasn't worth overcomplicating this to exactly figure out how we would fix it or make it better. So we are recommending supporting this. Moving into the residential zones section of the zoning code, similarly, triplex building types being added to the standards table for the optional methods of development in the RE2C, RE1, R200, R90, R60, and R40 zones. For the MPDU optional method, and then R90 also has a cluster optional method that this is being added to. Again, just consistent to allow triplexes where we allow duplexes and townhouses. Now we kind of get into the meat of what this ZTA does. We've entered the optional method section of code, and this is the optional method workforce housing actual section that kind of explains the process and the intent and the procedures behind that. Again, going through, the first thing that we hit is that site plan would be required for any of these projects. You know, we did hear in the testimony today a concern to want to make sure that remains. I think the counter concern that planning staff has is, you know, site plans are not easy, they're not quick, they're not cheap. And when we're thinking about, especially the smallest scale of this, that really, the intent of this is sort of, mostly it's a one-lot, single-family house to be turned into duplex, triplex, or small apartment. There could be some consolidation, but probably not on a massive scale along these corridors and these properties. We're really not talking about a development that's going to be at a scale that we think can shoulder a full site plan review. You know, so we kind of have a pair of recommendations that we didn't want to like write as code because we really think council needs to kind of consider this a little more thoroughly. But we do think that the board should either recommend to the council to either consider exempting very small, and I'm thinking maybe just these single lot conversions from a full site plan analysis. The other alternative is, and this is sort of borrowed from our attainable housing recommendations, that there might want to be an administrative site plan process created for smaller residential projects. You know, an administrative site plan would still require all the same documents to be submitted, all the same agencies will review it. We would do it a little quicker, and if there were not valid opposition received, could maybe be approved by the director. Again, we didn't want to really think through how this would work because we're not even sure there's support for it. So at this point, we're just recommending the council consider this as part of their deliberation, and we'd, again, be happy to work with them if they decide they do want to take that up.
Since this would still involve, it would still be an optional method process in general, can you just clarify what else would be, like what other components of that process still exist if we recommend that for some site plan, the site plan portion of this isn't required or it can be administratively approved? Like what other parts of optional are involved?
So optional method really, it's less of a major process change, and it's just more a way of looking at allowing for additional density or additional flexibility in exchange for, in this case, would be providing workforce housing. You know, they do tend to require site plan, which is your full review from all the different county agencies as well as planning. But there are other types of plans that also require site plan that aren't optional method. And so it's a little less about optional methods setting a process necessarily. It's setting that unique situation here that it's allowing new building types and more density or a different type of density in exchange for that workforce housing. So the only thing that potentially could be, I guess, lost is if you did exempt a single lot conversion, that would potentially take the site plan process of it out.
Yeah.
And again, there really is a longer conversation that needs to be had here about, well, what is the in lieu of that?
Right.
Again, if we think to attainable housing, it was the pattern book. That's not sort of on the table here. Maybe it needs to be. Again, it's one of these things where clearly council did not go down that path, and I think our recommendation is that we just sort of nudge them to reconsider either now or maybe as part of a future action to consider these things.
Yeah. I think that makes sense to me to ideally, in my view at least, we would exempt, not require the site plan for exactly the reason you mentioned. It can be, cost prohibitive, especially for smaller projects. It just may make small projects not feasible at all. We may see a trend toward at least the desire to consolidate, but there are fewer opportunities to consolidate. And I'd just be worried we're losing a lot of kind of, for lack of a better phrase, meat on the bone, which I say, my wife's vegan, she would like that I said that. Vegan meat on the bone.
Tofu on the bone.
Tofu on the bone. And, removing the site plan requirement is one way of potentially many to improve feasibility. We're already sort of dealing, and we can get more into this, we're already dealing with a fairly limited set of parcels countywide. I think 2,400 is my count. And you start sort of, diving down, you start chipping away various components of that and filtering down, it's even fewer, and we can talk more about that. But for those reasons, and to try to sort of maximize this effort and actually get some housing that's affordable to moderate income households, I think it makes a lot of sense to at least encourage the conversation around exempting site plan. Even if we make it an administrative approval, even going through a site plan preparation process can be a little prohibitive at times, I think. And so, yeah, I think my preference would be to encourage the conversation around exemption. And what does that mean for, is there a threshold for lot size in that regard? But with the understanding that the intent behind that is to improve feasibility. Yeah. It's really to make more of these parcels that have already been identified as parcels where we want this to happen, and help them happen,
Yep. So I agree that we should consider exempting very small developments. And does that, just to clarify that, just for the listening audience, that so still APFO would still be checked by someone, and during this process, where would that, all the things that we normally check for?
Yeah.
Yes, it again, depending on the project size, it may still require a small subdivision, even if we exempted site plan, and that would check the APF. And if it didn't trigger that, it would still be triggered at building permit. There's an APF review. So there's always a place to review APF. It just, we do it here as part of planning when we have the applications in front of us, but there are other ways it gets done if we don't see them.
Okay, great. I think it's I'm on board with,
I have one more option, that if that is something that is somewhere in between, that if we provide expedited administrative site plan review, because we don't have a pattern book. And it allows for some people that we just see that if there is any comment and take care of some of the concern that maybe some neighbors have. But have it and expedited, that would be another option in here, that somewhere in between, that no site plan, but expedited administrative review in absence of a pattern book.
It's not, I just want to jump in on that. It's not the timing, it's the administrative burden of the site plan, particularly for something that's on a single lot or a house-sized lot. Like, I would escalate from a nudge to a poke of the county council to consider exempting single lot or very small developments from having to submit a site plan, because I think the administrative burden for that, for something like a triplex, is high enough that it will just stop a lot of the developments at that point.
I think something else we could consider, because we don't have an administrative site plan to even say what it entails.
Yeah.
I think staff did envision if we did that, it would be expedited. There could be a discussion around reducing some of the submittal requirements, because some of it's just not going to be relevant for a single lot
For a single lot
application
development.
either. And that's just part of the conversation that we're not prepared to have today, but we think needs to happen.
I just think that I think that we should just cut out the consider administrative site plan, because I think a site plan in general is just not going to be, it's going to be something that's going to be a hurdle too far for a lot of folks to do this, and we're going to end up limiting what we've already limited. And so I think that when this goes to the council, I just think, like I said, I think it needs to go from a nudge to something a little bit more than that. They need to consider the administrative burden for a small lot. Otherwise, we just won't get any. And this will be another paper, this will be another paper project that won't create any more housing. And the administrative burden's too high.
I think your suggestion is in alignment with their goal to get more housing and get it quickly. And I think if you point that out, that it aligns with their goal, that they'd be more apt to accept it. Because it's perfectly in alignment with their goal.
These aren't development projects that'll be executed by people with large scales and large administrative capacity. These are projects that will be completed by individuals owning a lot, or, at best, like small builders or something within the county that would otherwise be doing a tear down. So I think minimizing the amount of administrative burden is an actual important step here.
So why don't we, so we have a lot to go over, so is it strongly consider whatever, but maybe the biggest thing is the why. The why is because of the, I don't know, the administrative costs, whatever, but it's the why is important, but I agree with this recommendation, whether it's strongly consider, whatever, and the why, then you have a lot to go over, are you okay with that, And it's also, and you're talking about possibly, you were agreeing with me, if you had to flesh out the administrative, it was more of it would have been an expedited to reduce the administrative burden and all these other things, right? Okay. Do you have enough information now that we can go on?
We have a wonderful note scribe over here that's jotting everything down, so yes, we do.
All right, great.
Moving through the standards of optional method workforce housing, there's a section that's development across different zones. This is standard for all optional method developments that would just allow if for some reason an application did acquire more than one site and those sites happen to be zoned differently but both eligible for this process, it just allows us to review it as one application. Getting into density and usable area. So usable area, it's a bit of an interesting choice to define the tracts here. It basically says that your tract area is your area unless 50% or more of that tract is an environmental buffer. If that's the case, everything over 50% of environmental buffer starts getting excluded. It's not likely to happen as part of one of these developments. It's usually something you run into a lot more on a greenfield site out in the up county with the big stream valley buffers that take up site. At the same time, just because it's not going to hurt anything and that's what they've drafted, my guess is just let's leave it and not worry about it. So that's our recommendation. Getting into the density part of this, a little bit of a different conversation. So the ZTA is setting density across all 4 zones as just 1.25 FAR. I think we like the FAR approach because this does provide an incentive for an applicant to do smaller units because they might be able to get an additional unit if they do that. Some of the questions we have are, A, why is this listed up in the front and not just as part of each of the development standard tables? It's actually listed in both places, and I think anytime we do that, it's fraught for problem because you might have a future ZTA that forgets to amend it in both places. The other thing that we've noticed is 1.25 FAR, it's not even possible in some of the zones to be reached. If you look at the coverage and the setbacks and the height that it's being allowed, and it's just not good to set a false expectation that you can have something that you can't actually have. And so the table on the screen is showing what the actual maximum FAR in each of these 4 zones would be, assuming a 3-story building and then assuming a 4-story building. We do this because the height is set at 40 feet, but it's 40 feet at the highest point. It's not even at the midpoint of a pitched roof. So any pitched roof building is effectively a 3-story building. And even 4 stories, unless you have perfect grading, it's hard to get that 4th floor out of in 40 feet. So the numbers are what they are. They're in our report already. I think what we're recommending is that again, the board just sort of suggests the council kind of consider this information rather than telling them this is what the new number should be. And again, also, my vote is let's just remove any density from this section, and it really should just be a discussion in these standards tables.
Yeah, I really like that approach. I also really appreciate how, at least this presentation of the information, it illustrates how, we need to be sensitive to site characteristics. And if we want to actually optimize the amount of units on these sites, it makes sense not to apply a flat standard, but instead approach each with what is feasible given what is spelled out in code, which still means that these individual parcels will be it's internally consistent. They'll be sort of compatible with each other based on these other characteristics, even though I don't particularly like using that word with regard to this, but I think it's important to note that even if we use this approach, this sort of the sliding scale approach to FAR, at least suggests consideration of it, it does lead to compatibility. It still does lead to compatibility, so I do think it's internally consistent in that way, and it's sensitive to the characteristics of the sites themselves. So I appreciate, I appreciate the attention to that and this approach.
Moving into the section labeled development standards, there are a number of standards here. The first is a requirement of 15% workforce housing across the developments. We'll get into a recommended clarification on the next slide. This does have the max 40-foot building height listed, as well as the minimum site size equals the minimum lot size of underlying zone. Both B and C, again, are things that I think you'll see on the next slide, staff's just recommending should be in the standards table and not kind of up front. D requires parking behind the front building line, and E is clarifying that there should be one driveway per street frontage as part of these applications. And so again, as we're recommending, first off, the clarity here, what the intent of this 15% workforce housing as it's written, it is trying to exempt the duplex. So the duplex could, in theory, just do 2 market rate units. It's trying to get that if there's 3 or more units as part of a development, whether it's 2 duplexes, that's 4 units, or whether it's 1 triplex, or all of those should then start doing the 15% workforce housing. And I think the way it was worded, it was more complicated than it needed to be. We think this is a cleaner way of expressing that idea that any development with 3 or more units provide this.
But just to make sure I understand, though, and I don't remember if we've already talked about this or if this is elsewhere in the ZTA, but is it specified that triplexes are required to provide at least one? So even though the 15% kicks in, 15% of 3 is obviously less than 1, but are the triplexes required to provide one?
They would be, and this would still do that because we round up. If you trigger even a fraction of a percent more of an MPDU now, we make you provide the whole next MPDU. And so, right, one of 3 triplexes is 33%. That's well more than 15. But because you have to provide at least 15, you just have to provide whatever satisfies that 15. Okay. So, yeah, so even a single triplex would be required to do 1 under this provision.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
So that means no duplexes can be built?
So a duplex would not trigger this.
Yeah.
A duplex could be built, and it would not require the workforce housing unit to be in one of the 2 units. It's basically, duplexes are allowed as part of workforce housing. I think this was an attempt to be reasonable that a 2-unit building couldn't have one of them set as affordable and ever expect the other unit to be able to cover the cost of that. I think that was the council intent here. So that's all this is just doing, is if you really are just doing a single duplex, you are exempt from the workforce housing.
So they can do that, but they would be exempt. That's what I just wanted to understand.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just, you said a pitched roof, typically it's to the middle of the roof. Is there a reason, it was specifically stated here that doesn't work here, or why?
A lot of the zones actually will say your maximum height's 30 feet as measured at middle or 35 feet highest point, depending on how you want to do it. They've just gone ahead and chosen to set a flat value and set it at the highest peak.
I see.
In some ways, I think it gives flexibility. If somebody wants to do a flatter roofed product,
Right,
they can
right,
try to maximize the space. I think it's really about the compatibility of just, because we've also seen developers try to do very steep roofs and play around with that. And this is sort of a way of just saying nothing will ever be more than 40,
Okay, great.
regardless of how they design it.
Great, thank you.
The next section of the optional method is talking about the applicable corridors. Again, this currently sets out that the front lot lines must abut a boulevard, downtown street, town center boulevard, or a controlled major highway on any master planned right-of-way that's greater than 100 feet and has 3 or more existing vehicle travel lanes. Something I do want to mention here, because it was brought up as part of the testimony today. When we look at travel lanes, we're adding them up across both sides. So actually, Georgia Avenue, we would consider to be a 6-lane road, not a 3. And so the example of Old Georgetown, it has been reduced to 2 lanes in each direction, but that's still 4 as we would add it up. So I just wanted to be very clear about that. This is for 3 or more, and so it could be 2 going northbound, 1 going southbound. That's your 3. Here we have sort of a map of all of the corridor segments that meet the definition of the zoning text amendment as it's introduced. They are widely varying. There's some similarity to the corridors we're used to seeing in Thrive 2050, but this sort of picks up some additional corridors as options. Obviously, there's now then the intersection of the right zoning along them that you don't actually have this many sections of corridor that have the zoning adjacent to them that is eligible for it. But this does highlight all of the road segments that met that definition. This is a list of all of the roads that actually meet, a portion of these roads meet the definition. We do have a much larger, and I can go back in a second. We do have it's about a 9-page long list of Georgia Avenue between this road and this road so we have that available. It's not.
Yeah. Are those
here.
gaps mostly where you're running into CR zoning? Is that where, like, because on the map, and we've seen versions of different, are you running into different zoning, or what's the issue along those corridors?
It could be zoning, it could be.
I'm thinking of like around the North Bethesda, around portions of, I think that's Georgia along Wheaton, that there's the gaps along the corridor that I would think, I'm assuming that's when you're running into CR zoning or something of those. Yeah, although, yeah. Okay, just curious.
I see, it looks like Commissioner might be trying to take a picture, so I don't want to. Oh, you want to see this one again? Okay. So in looking at the definition, and this was brought up, it's something that staff's questioned, the community's questioned. It is a little unclear the way it was worded, what is really intended or what applies when we say that the front lot line must abut. Is this existing properties? Is this the future lots? Does it just mean that as long as a property is part of a consolidation has one? And so I think in talking with council staff, it's pretty clear it really is intended for the existing properties need to have the frontage now before.
Okay.
And so you could consolidate, but you'd have to consolidate kind of along
horizontally
the corridor. And so we are recommending language that says that any lot or parcel included in the application's tract must abut one of these corridors.
Would this, if I can ask one quick question, would this prohibit, say you're going to split a duplex or triplex and make it, assuming you have a large lot and you want to make it fee simple and have it split up, would this prohibit creating or splitting a lot that's got one piece, one part that abuts it on the front and another that doesn't, splitting the lot basically?
So the intent here would be if the original tract had the frontage, if they then subdivided that and created a smaller lot that doesn't anymore, that's okay because the tract at the time of application had the frontage.
That's what I was going to say. So the tract at the time of development application, not necessarily, and assuming that the other tracts would then meet requirements that we have for frontage on the roads and stuff. Got it.
From my understanding, the lot on the backside that had an address on the back street does not, you can't consolidate those two lots.
Okay.
Correct. The intent was not to do that, and we think this clarifies that a little better.
Gotcha. So,
Okay, yeah.
sorry. Good. Kind of along those lines, I think I probably know the answer, but if someone wanted to consolidate, not in that, using that example where it's like kind of in an adjacent parcel facing a parallel street to the back, but like, what about an adjacent parcel maybe on the same corridor that's not included in the set of parcels currently included, but it's facing the corridor, it's addressed to the corridor. Maybe it has a different zoning, for example. It's not one of the R zones. Is that contemplated by this, or do we think that might be allowable?
As this is drafted, that wouldn't be allowed if it's not in one of the 4 eligible zones, because you can only do a workforce housing optional method if you're in the R290, 60 or 40. If you were adjacent to and it was a CR or an employment zone, and again, this is sort of an existing paradigm that's already in zoning, is like, if you're in a similar zoning class, we allow you to sort of treat it as one application. Yeah. When there's you're going from residential to employment zone, we don't allow those to be seen as a joint application. In theory, you could, but you have to treat them with 2 very separate data tables, and all the analysis is done separately.
Yeah. And there's no opportunity to pursue like a map amendment or
there's always the opportunity to request it at your risk.
Right. Okay. But basically, the overall intent seems like whether it's a single parcel, single lot, or assembling multiple, all of them have to meet these characteristics at the time of application.
Yes.
Okay.
And I apologize, I normally try to get my questions in before things come to the board, but occasionally I don't have the opportunity, so I have a question for staff. My understanding is what we were attempting to do here with this change was to try to better match what the intent of the introduced language was. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when I read this and it says of any lot or parcel included in the applications tract, it reads to me as if it means only one needs to. But I think the intention was that all need to front. Is that right? Is that what it was intended?
Yes. Are you suggesting we say that of every lot or parcel?
I think to match what was the intention of the introduced ZTA is it should say that the front lot line of all lots or parcels included in an applications tract must abut.
Staff would be acceptable with staff's amendment. I think the board's okay with that. Yeah, okay. The next thing we want to talk about with applicable corridors is controlled major highways. To be frank, I'm not sure why we included these. I can tell you there's one little, and so I'll be honest, there's one little section of 355 where it's called Frederick Road up in Germantown. It's actually the area from basically the bottom of the creek that separates Gaithersburg from Germantown and then climbing up the hill before you get to Middlebrook that is considered in the master plan currently a controlled major highway, but there are a few properties that confront it. Pretty much everywhere else we have controlled major highway, there was either nothing that even triggered an eligibility or it was like a one-off already developed apartment complex that was in the R200 zone and went through some special process to get there. And so the impact of removing them would be very limited. And you know, when you really look at the Complete Streets Design Guide of what a controlled major highway is, it's not something that we really or should be, I think, encouraging this type of development on. And if we have a corridor that we want to re-envision, then the master plan could go in and say, well, we don't want this to be a controlled major highway anymore. That might change its eligibility with the ZTA going forward. That'd probably be the better way to address it than to take Great Seneca Highway and just say, well, it's applicable, it just really probably shouldn't be. And so our recommendation is to remove those. The other recommendation, and I'll just show the whole amended text here, is to just strike listing all the boulevard types out and just say that any boulevard street type should be qualified. And part of why we're doing that is there's discussion going on now that we might be adding a new boulevard type called corridor boulevard. And so rather than having to amend the code again in a short time, let's just let all boulevards be eligible. And so those are the two recommendations we want to make to this section.
Would that would maintain downtown street as well, right? In that list, is that? Oh, sorry, Jason. Go for it. Oh, yeah. If we only, I want to make sure that downtown street. I don't have the complete streets design guide in front of me, so I'm not sure if it's under boulevard. I just want to make sure that we're not pulling something else out as we're
That might have
making
been
that.
an oversight on our part. We did not intend to pull that out.
Okay, I just want to make sure we do maintain downtown street. Controlled highway, I totally understand. I totally get it.
Admittedly, I didn't look thoroughly. I'm not sure how much R200 zoning we have on downtown streets, but it's
Fair
not something
enough.
that gives us a pause based on its design standards, so I think we'll leave it in.
Okay, great.
The next two sections for the optional method, workforce housing, one talking about dedicated land. Again, I don't think this is going to come up much, but it's sort of a standard across all optional methods that if you dedicate land for schools or parks, you can use the density off of it. That's fine. And then in community water and sewer, this really is to make sure that we don't have, again, mostly R200. We do have R200 properties that are probably otherwise on roads that would qualify for this, that are outside of our water sewer envelope, out kind of in the fringes of the county. And this would sort of make sure those don't try to do development. They probably wouldn't be able to anyway with the well and septic requirements, but this is just being very clear. You need water and sewer hookup to do this, and we support that. The next thing, and this has gotten some conversations going, is regarding parking. There's no mention of it in the ZTA at all. And I think it's a concern for us for a number of different reasons, and we'll go through a few of them. The first of which gets back to the idea that, as I mentioned earlier, that there's actually no use for 3-unit living. There's nothing in the parking table either about how to park this. I talked with our friends at DPS today. They were going to instruct staff to just follow the townhouse standards. It would lack of option because they've combined townhouse and triplex on some of the data tables. Those would require 2 spaces per unit as a default. The other option to look at this is to treat triplex as a multi-unit type structure, and we actually park the multi-unit living based on number of bedrooms rather than just a flat rate. And so there is a little bit of room for less parking if you do it that way, particularly if you're getting smaller units. There's also existing provisions in code that do allow for a 50% reparking reduction for any affordability controlled unit, including workforce housing or MPDUs. So on larger sites, there will be at least some units that can have a parking reduction now. I want to be clear with that. And 24% of the eligible properties fell within the areas that the ZTA from a year and a half ago exempted from requiring parking because of their proximity to Metro Purple Line or a planned and funded BRT station. But that does leave 76% that would, in theory, have to do 2 spaces per unit. And the problem with that is we just don't see how it fits. And we talked about this with attainable housing. We bring it up a bit again, particularly on your R60 lots, but even into the R90 lots, when you try to get into 3 or more units, it just doesn't fit very well. And so a duplex we can make fit with 4 spaces, which is what the upper left image is showing, but you basically have a parking lot behind the building and nothing else. And that's the only configuration that fits. When we tried to do any other configuration, it cut into the buildable area too much and it became impractical. And when you try to do a triplex, we just can't fit it on an R60 lot with the parking requirements. When you look at the R90 lots, the duplex, still the best option is the same, to have all the parking in a single row behind the building. I kind of did a single slash across the other two. There's some buildable area left, but it's not great. Triplexes, kind of same thing. Some of them sort of work, some of them don't really work at all. But it's just painting the picture that, you know, for that one reason, we just don't think it would ever fit anyway. And I think the other reason, and this ties a bit into the environmental discussion, it's a lot of pavement. And these are corridors that, while they're not all on a planned BRT route, there's bus service on almost all of them at a minimum, and some of them have much better transit access. And so, you know, we do think there needs to be some parking reductions considered here. So one of the options would be just a flat one space per unit as part of the requirements for this optional method of development. I think the other that probably requires a little bit more parking, but maybe is also a little more easy to justify, and I think it should at least be an option we make to council, is to have all of the optional method workforce housing base its parking off of the multi-unit standard. And so if it's a 3 or larger bedroom unit, they need 2 spaces. Smaller than 3 bedroom units can start having incrementally less parking spaces. It wouldn't be quite as little as 1 space per unit, but it would definitely be less than the full requirement. And so those are sort of our recommendations around that.
With the 40-foot height limit, that does not allow for the construction of a type that allows parking underneath the structure, does it? I don't think that gets you tall enough.
You could, but you'd end up with really small.
You'd end up with
lose a floor, and so you only have 2
lose a
floors.
floor, yeah.
Yeah, you can do tuck under parking, but I think the parking constraints that you're seeing on these slides don't go away. The parking just ends up being in the building, and you still need space to maneuver in and out of the
In
building.
and out, you still
so
have that right side.
you end up using more space for the drive aisles and things. So it's not it doesn't solve the problem, even though you can fit parking in 40 feet in a tuck under setting.
I mean, I'm thinking of the existing ones that I can think of off the top of my head that have that townhome structure with the under unit parking, and they're considerably taller, I think, than 40 feet to allow for that. So I mean, unless we also recommend upping the height, and then like you were saying, it still makes for coverage issues. And
Yeah, I don't even think if you had another floor, it would solve the problem because just the footprint of the parking takes up so much of the land.
Space. Yeah.
I think some version of this definitely makes sense to recommend. And of course, as we saw in the renderings, like unless there is a tuck under solution, and it sounds like that's challenging in some ways. I mean, we're talking about a lot of impervious surface for 4 up to 6, probably maybe more than 6 in some cases, spaces, and it not only takes up a lot of the usable space for the property, it just adds a lot of impervious surface that's going to contribute to, you know, potentially drainage issues and runoff and all those associated environmental impacts. So, and that's to say nothing of just the kind of the project feasibility, the financial feasibility, the fact that, to your point, you know, these will be on corridors that many of which are planned for future BRT, but even thinking about today, there is adequate bus service on many of these corridors, and I think the real benefit, if there is one, of focusing on growth corridors like this right now, or not growth corridors, but corridors, many of which are growth corridors, is that, you know, we are bringing many of these units closer to current transit options, whether it's bus or in some cases like 24% are relatively close to Metro and Purple Line, although those are the ones that are exempt entirely. So I like the suggestion of recommending a reduction. You know, my preference is is always to go lower. So if 1 space per unit is consistently lower than basing it on number of bedrooms, you know, I think that's preferable given the other things that we're talking about too. But yeah, I'm interested to hear how others feel about that.
Yeah, I think your recommendation is fine. I would go along with your recommendation, and I do think, as you said, Commissioner Linden, you know, if you had 2 spaces per unit, we'll definitely have less impervious. You have more impervious area there, but and at the same time, I also think that, you know, it's both ways, because remember, developers came to us recently with that condo option 2, back to back, I don't know how that, and they were able to park some under, and maybe you only park one space under. And then that space in the front could be usable space. So I think that regardless, we should get, whatever happens, you get it going, and maybe the builders will be creative in some way, but I do recommend that one space would work better, per unit, but I think we should put it out there and then keep going. But I really appreciate what you said.
I just want to add one more thing, is that if we don't allow waiver for stormwater management, none of this would happen.
Yeah.
Just talk to DPS. It's not going to happen because they're not going to get permit. So, that's something to think about.
So I think it'll be really challenging to have 2 spaces per unit on site and be able to conform to the stormwater management.
Even one space you may not be
Even
able
one
to.
is tight.
Yeah, even
Right.
with one is tight, because most of these are small lots and they are older houses. They had no stormwater management. And when you redevelop, you provide better stormwater management with the waiver, because you give them, because the property is so small, you may not be able to do 100%, but you do 60 to 70%. That is still better than existing. But if we don't allow the waiver, they can't build.
I also just wanted to say that this is more of a general comment at this point, but this is a perfect time to point out that I think in some form or fashion, it would be helpful to talk about the cumulative impact of a lot of the things that we're talking about. So stormwater, parking, some of the other, like the site plan kind of consideration. When you start jumbling all of these things together, it really cumulatively starts to chip away at feasibility and the number of available opportunities there are for units to come that can serve moderate income households. So if there's an opportunity to include that message, that it's not only, we can talk specifically about pieces of this, but let's also consider the whole. And when we package them together, what does that actually mean for feasibility?
Thank you for writing my transmittal, because there's no way I'm adding all like 80 of these recommendations. It's going to be an attachment, so that's a great summary of what you're going to find in the comments are for this very reason. So,
and exactly for what Commissioner Linden, you said, I think that expedited administrative review should be the part that look at that cumulative impact and eliminates, if any, based on each individual that they're going to come in.
I just pretty much just backing up what everybody else has said, but I do think that when we're transmitting this to the council, we have to call out the things that will kill the production of housing. And I think the parking is a huge one. I mean, the parking is a big one. If we don't address that, nothing will get built. It will just be a paper thing that we've spent a lot of time on for no purpose. So we have to call out the parking. They can do what they want with that information, but if you don't address it, we won't get one extra unit. And we need to make sure that that's clear. A lot of the rest of this stuff we can go round and round about, but the parking thing will kill anything being built.
And just sorry, I know that, and then
we got a lot
to go, but for the sake of sort of, I know we talk about this internally a lot, but talking to we hear the fear surrounding parking from the community is that they assuming that reduction means no requirement at all, no parking will come at all. And I think the reality that we're trying to get at is that what we were talking about before, sites are inherently different. Conditions around who's building these projects are inherently different. And reducing parking requirements does not mean that no parking will be included. It means that there's more flexibility for the people who want to provide these projects to meet the conditions of the site, to assess what the demand is in those areas, to assess what they think the transit opportunities are and what that might mean for demand for this kind of housing in those areas. It's about flexibility in the end. And, so the whole conversation around reducing parking requirements, I know, we all know this up here and we talk about it this way. But removing a requirement does not mean that no parking will come. Whoever's going to build these homes knows that most people in Montgomery County will drive at some point, and many of them will bring a car with them, and they'll build accordingly. So the idea here is optimal flexibility, and with the intent to sort of make more of these projects feasible.
Okay, why don't we, did you have a comment? No.
My comment is brief. I used to think that the parking requirement made sense and that the requirement was necessary, but I've had a change of heart. And the change of heart is that a person who is willing to take on the risk to reduce the need for housing by developing a project with no parking, they should be absolutely allowed to do it. And requiring them to have parking frustrates their use of the land and also frustrates the opportunity to get more housing. So having a mandatory requirement for parking, I think, is the antithesis of wanting to resolve the housing crisis.
Okay, so we're gonna, we've talked enough about this, and at the end of the day, we've talked about it before when we had our other, so I think the council members know the challenge, and they were, so we'll, at the end of the day, Mr. Berber will present, maybe some challenges, but we need to move forward with our, going on with this, okay?
Yeah, and just before we do, because I do know that we do have a lot of people who are watching, despite the number of people in the room not being that large, and people will scrutinize all of the things that are in here, rightfully so. I just want to, if we could go back to the images showing the potential parking layouts, I think before we send these on to the council, or if we prepare something for the council's discussions, we need to make sure that those triplex drawings only include 5 parking spaces, because under the introduced, it would be 2 for each of the non-workforce units, and then because of the reduction that exists today for the price-controlled units, including workforce housing, it would be a 50% reduction. The third unit, that is the workforce unit, only needs 1. So we should be trying to get 5 spaces, not 6 spaces on there. So let's make sure we're sending the correct thing.
We can make that correction.
Okay, why don't we continue, please?
Okay. Getting into the actual development standards tables that exist for the optional method in the 4 applicable zones. The sort of first section, unofficial first section, is the top of the table. It serves as the column headings, and it lists all the building types out. They are not including single-family detached, and they are adding triplex. It makes sense there's no single-family detached because that's standard method. That wouldn't be applicable here. And adding triplex has been a part of the discussion all along, so staff supports that as shown. The next sort of set of standards in the table is under the grouping of site standard. This sets a usable minimum area for each of the zones, and it sets it as the same as the minimum lot size for a detached house, which, given the intent of the ZTA, staff finds reasonable. And it also talks about site coverage maximums, specifically for the townhouse and the apartment building type. There's 2 types of coverage. There's site coverage and there's lot coverage. Site coverage is looking at the portion of a greater site that's used for a specific building type. You often see this for townhouses and apartments and other zones within our code, because when you have a townhouse community, often the townhouse lots themselves are very highly covered, especially the middle units, because you don't have side yards, you just have the front and the back. But often there's parking or there's open space associated with a townhouse or apartment development that might be on a separate parcel that's adjacent to the building. And so in those instances, the coverage is allowed to be averaged across the associated open space parcel or parking parcel along with the building itself. In the duplex and single-family homes, they often just use a lot coverage because you do often create a lot, you have yards, you don't have necessarily the open space as a separate parcel or the parking as a separate parcel. Because this optional method of development starts at duplex and goes up, staff actually thinks that using site coverage for all of this just makes more sense than having the individual lots have to calculate it. It provides a lot more flexibility to create an open space parcel, to allow variation of lot sizes and shapes, to allow different unit sizes to cross the lot in a different way. And so we think the coverage limit that was given is fine. We just think the whole project should really be a site coverage, and we should remove the lot coverage standard. Looking at the lot and density and the lot minimums, lot area per unit is listed as, it's listed as lot area per unit in the standards table, with the minimums for the duplex set at half of a site area, and the triplex was set at the third of a site area. And then for townhouses, a number was just picked that was a lot smaller. I couldn't quite find a pattern exactly as to why they picked, but it ranged between 1,000 and 2,000 square feet. Something staff wants to note, and again, this really applies to those middle units on townhouse development and also a triplex if it's done as a 3 units in a row. The largest minimum lot area we have in code now for a townhouse is 1,250 square feet, and that's to account for the fact that those middle units are going to be on very small lots. For me to make 2,000 square feet work, I need a 24-foot wide townhouse that is the full depth of a standard R200 lot. It's huge. And so we're recommending kind of first that we just lower the townhouse to be no larger than 1,200 square feet to at least be consistent with roughly the upper end of that. The other thing in this discussion that we found a little odd is that it called it lot area per unit in parentheses. I've not seen that anywhere else in code, and it made me wonder, was there a reason for this? And I couldn't really figure out what the intent was, and so again, this gets back to something we've thought about as we've been exploring how to make this stuff fit. There's sort of 2 options here. One would be really to make it a per unit average, and this would allow a lot of flexibility, again, to have some larger and some smaller lots for the same unit type to get different size units. Again, really, all we're trying to conform are the boxes that are the houses roughly compatible with each other. The lot lines are just sort of fictitious lines at the end of the day. The other option is to consider that it should really just be site area per unit, and we don't even need a lot area standard. Again, I think either could work. I think trying to get something to stick, I'm of the camp of let's give both options and let council decide if they're more comfortable with one over the other. And so those are the 2 recommendations, to either add the word average to lot area per unit, or let's just get rid of lot area and make it site area. The next section of the tables gets into placement, which is the setbacks. These are all of our front, side, rear setbacks. Rear setback if you're against an alley, against a street, there's all kinds of different things in there. It's pretty much a copy and paste from what the standard method development requires, with a few minor exceptions. There's a little bit of a reduction of front setback in a couple of zones. And in these residential zones, a detached house will often say you have to have a side setback of 8 feet, sum of 20, so that one has to be a little bigger than the other. This just sort of took the smaller number and said you can have it on both sides. You know, again, knowing the intent of the ZTA, we think it's reasonable to keep all of these standards in place. We talked about height a little bit earlier. Again, this is being set as 40 feet to the highest point of the roof across all zones. For reference, this is consistent with what the R200 zone allows for building heights for lots that are 15,000 to 25,000 square feet in size. It's a 5-foot addition to the maximum height allowed in the other 3 zones, so it's a little bit more flexible there. Accessory structures, they're similar to what's allowed in the underlying zone, and so we support all of these. And then the last 2 sections, building form, it's in every standards table, allowing porches, stoops, awnings, other things, and it's allowing them here. We support that. Agriculture, all the residential zones do kind of come with the underlying premise that agriculture is allowed. Probably won't see a lot of combines on these sites, but like, you never know. And all the provision does, and again, this is everywhere in the code, it allows an accessory structure up to 40 feet high if you can prove it's being used for agriculture. Again, probably not going to happen here, but why change what's everywhere else? So we are recommending keeping it. Next kind of big chunk of the ZTA is all of the townhouse, multi-unit CR and employment zones with the standards listed out here, are just adding triplex as an available building type to them. We support that move. We're briefly going to circle back to the climate assessment just because we said we would. The first slide here is the same summary slide we shared of just broadly the types of impacts that we saw on the directions they took. The next slide, I think, is probably the one we want to talk a little bit more about, and it actually has the recommendations that were included in that assessment. Again, the first one was to consider parking reductions. Second was to add a requirement that 3 to 4 unit buildings, whether we call them triplex and small apartment or what we choose to call them, should require safe conveyance and control of any increase in water runoff resulting from additional impervious surface or topographic alterations. This is a requirement that detached house and duplexes have to have now. So if we are going to be fair and sort of say that these are single-family detached house-sized buildings, they probably should be treated the same. What the actual assessment said regarding the management waivers is that we should assess the need for new standards regarding stormwater management waivers. I think it's a little less frightening than the bullet we inadvertently had on the slide last week. I do think whether it's coming up with a whole new type of waivers for infill development is an option. You know, I don't want to even surmise what it is. Really, the recommendation is just to assess them going forward. And again, assessing the changes to chapters 49 for the road code and 55 for tree canopy about reducing the spacing and area needed for tree plantings from the current standard. I know there's concern that if you reduce them too far, you end up potentially hindering the ability or health of the tree. You know, not that this is ideal, but there are some massive, beautiful trees growing out of little holes in the streets of Baltimore. I know there's problems with the health of the tree, the sidewalks can bulge, but I think it also shows that there could be room to slightly reduce our standards, or even it's giving partial credit for planting trees in substandard spaces. I mean, there's, again, I don't think we have the answers. I think we need to look at them because it is a reoccurring problem, and we know we want to encourage tree planting, not encourage payment. So these were the recommendations that are in that assessment. I think staff still feels like they're the appropriate recommendations, and we would not recommend the board sort of request to alter them, but I think we are leaving that option available because we said we would come back to this.
Yeah, I'm fine with these recommendations because in many cases it says assess, and you'll have some comments on, you know, our general concerns, and so I'm fine with these recommendations. I don't know, with the other board members, yeah.
Okay. That was the hardest ZT to go through. It's easier from here, thankfully.
Yeah, but one, you know, when you were talking about setbacks, earlier on, you know, in the previous life of this, we were talking about what should driveway widths be, and you know, so that you can get with that. So as it currently stands, that, you know, the driveway widths and all the other stuff, it'll be whatever the current code is for that. Is that what?
It would be. So part of that discussion was with the pattern book, and it was really trying to encourage taking the minimum as the standard. So currently you can't have a 10-foot driveway. You can have a wider driveway. You know, I think a developer is going to be smart. If 10 feet's what they need to make it all fit, they'll do it. I think we were in the pattern book discussion, we wanted to set a model example, and that's why we were pushing to really tighten things down. The only thing probably might be the driveway flares that is required, and it's not ideal. But again, I think at some point we have to be incremental and strategic about this, and I don't want to over bombard things. I think we can get projects moving with the current codes, with some of the other things we've discussed.
Thank you for explanation.
All right. The next item in the now package is for ZTA 2503, the commercial to residential reconstruction. same idea going through this, define terms. This adds the new term commercial to residential reconstruct, and then it tells you instantly to go turn to its use standards later in the code. That's not uncommon. We support the addition of this definition. The next change is adding the commercial residential reconstruct as a limited use to the use table in the CRN, CRT, CR, NR, and EOF zones. This does exclude the GR and LSC employment zones. I think staff wanted to look a little bit more into why were these two zones excluded. The LSC zone, I think the exclusion we felt made sense in large part because there's only a few places where this exists in the county, and most of it's within the Great Seneca Science Overlay Zone, which we just discussed, and allows more residential uses already. The GR zone we looked at, and there's almost no properties that would actually be eligible for a commercial to residential reconstruct based on its definition. So we recommend that.
Commissioner Bartney will have to leave in 5-10 minutes, and I thought it would be best if we can do a vote on the first ZTA that you discussed so that we can at least move that forward while he's here. Thank you. Okay. So do I have a motion to approve ZTA 2502 Workforce Housing Development Standards that staff presented with comments, with the clarifications, with their proposed changes and clarifications that we discussed? Not to approve it, but to approve comment. To approve submitting comments to the county council.
Yeah. Approve the transmittal. Move to approve the transmittal of comments on 25-02.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it 5-0. Thank you.
And I would thank the planning director for sorting that motion out.
Can I ask that when we say residential reconstruction, does it mean that it has to be demolished and rebuilt, or could it be that we just convert it? I don't know exactly what is included.
So thankfully, we're on the defined slide. So yes, it is both. The definition of a commercial to residential reconstruction is that it is a office or retail building that is considered at least 50% vacant at the time of application. It has to be at least 2 stories tall, and that it can be a renovation or a demolition and reconstruction of that site into either townhouse living or multi-unit living. I think staff's fine with the definition. The one recommendation we have, and this really is sort of being borrowed from ZTA 2501 we discussed last week, where they had a look-back provision to ensure vacancy. I think, not wanting to completely eliminate our employment opportunities, particularly if they have been vacant until very recently, we're recommending there also be a 2-year look-back provision that you've been at least 50% vacant. I think the board could take it or leave it, but I think we thought it made it a little bit of a smarter definition.
Yeah, I saw that, and my opinion is maybe 2 years is too long, and I was thinking if we put anything at all, maybe a 1 year, but I wanted to hear from the other board members.
I think both the time and the extent of vacancy is awfully large. Like, I think it's fine, but I think you could lower the amount of vacancy and lower the length of time. I agree with the fact that the time and the amount of vacancy, because we have, commercial office building structures, like a lot of the vacancy is spread, not concentrated highly with building. I think 50% is too high, honestly, to encourage much conversion.
But I
I think we should take the 2-year or 1 year out. I'm okay with 50%, but we leave it on the commercial to decide if it's worth it for them to do it with no time restrictions.
I would not take out the 50%. I mean, that is what they worked with to put out the ZTA, but the timing, I think it should be less than 2 years or not have it at all.
I think I'm okay not having a time requirement. That they can, and just kind of leave it up to their discretion.
It's gone. The next section of the commercial residential reconstruction plan section is the exemptions. This first one would allow the use to be reviewed by a special expedited plan. It sort of reinforces that you still must follow the rules of Chapter 50 as part of your application, and that any amendment that was started under this plan could continue being processed as an amendment to that plan. The only thing staff is pointing out, the way they wrote particularly sections A and C, it refers to a commercial to residential reconstruction plan, and that's not actually what this is. It's an expedited approval plan for that use. It's being a little technically nitpicky, but I think it's cleaner to strike commercial to residential reconstruction and just call it what it is. It's an expedited approval plan. And so those are the two amendments that we're proposing to this section. Getting into the use standards that are set for this, one of the standards would allow that any mapped commercial FAR as part of the underlying zone could actually be converted to residential FAR through this application, so long as you don't exceed the total mapped FAR or total height. The other states that in red policy areas, this is only allowed as an apartment building type, and that in other policy areas, it can be townhouse living or multi-unit living. I think here, the intent's fine. Staff finds it strange that in red policy areas, we reference a building, whereas in the others, we reference a use. I think it'd be ideal if it was consistent. The building is probably cleaner to fix this to, and so we've drafted legislation that has it talk about townhouse buildings or apartment buildings, and the appropriate section references are amended, so we recommend that change. Okay. The next section of changes in the code really are just reflecting the fact that this is a new type of group living, and that all the other group livings are then forced out of their current home and have to move down a letter in code. And so, we support that and understand that. Next section of the ZTA gets into the density and height provisions of the employment zones. This is an interesting one because it allows properties in the NR and EOF zones that are not doing a commercial to residential reconstruct, but just any property generally, can come in and convert the commercial FAR to residential FAR. Staff's not inherently opposed to the policy, but does note this is a pretty big change that sort of slipped in as a very small line of code change. The current intent of these employment zones is to permit non-residential uses, including office technology and general commercial with limited residential, promote economic diversity and job creation, targeting jobs and services, and otherwise there's a bullet, limit residential uses to 30% of the gross floor area. And so, again, I don't want to wordsmith this, but it sort of feels like council might want to consider really re-envisioning what employment zones are if they're going to make provisions that allow you to not actually create employment in them. And so the short-term fix really is to just kind of update a couple of the standards and remove that 30% cap, because that's problematic stating that. I think long-term, probably to both council and planning, it's do we keep employment zones? But that's a longer-term question, but I think it's worth mentioning now as part of our discussions.
I was noticing, I think this is a good idea. I think if you want, the stated goal is to co-locate employment and housing, and this is the way you get to that. I think this is I think from a policy standpoint, it's a good policy shift. I think if you want to call out the issues with the 30%, stuff like that, I think it's fine. But the neighborhood retail is not going to come if there's nobody to go to the neighborhood retail anyway, so what does it matter? What does it matter? And I think same thing with the other employment zones. I think at some point we probably need to think about whether or not they're useful and whether or not CR is the way to go for all of these. But yeah, I like this policy.
What is the recommendation? You're getting to that, right? Or just what? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did. All the recommendations are later, but
okay,
so
great.
I'll pause and we'll talk about something else and then get to the end of this. The other thing is we re-looked at LSC and GR again. I think for the same reason stated earlier, the LSC zone probably doesn't need to be given this commercial to residential conversion because it's mostly either hospitals or it's covered by the Great Seneca Science Corridor. GR is a little bit different this time, and we actually do have little maps. Again, life science is kind of the pink on the right. Again, most of it right under Gaithersburg is the Great Seneca Science area. The bit you have north of Gaithersburg, just to the east of town, Germantown, that is Holy Cross Hospital and the office park that's sort of associated with its development. And then way off in the southeast corner, you have the Adventist hospital site. GR is a little different. There's a lot of GR, especially up in Germantown, and it's their NR, but for some reason it's GR. The other two sites I've mentioned are Wheaton Mall here and Montgomery Mall. Both are sites that I think are probably interested in housing and might want to do more than 30% if they were given the opportunity. So we do think that, again, at minimum, we need to remove the 30% residential from the intent. It needs to be removed from the development standards tables as a requirement. And we think that the GR zone should be added to the list of employment zones that can take advantage of this if we're being consistent. Okay. The last major section of this ZTA is the expedited approval plan. So we have 3 existing expedited-like approval plans for Signature Business Headquarters, BioHealth Priority Campus, and Mixed Income Housing Community. They're all extensively the same in what you're required to submit and how they're reviewed and how they're processed. This, I think, it's really adding the 4th plan type, but I think they listened to comments we had made earlier. Really, it's one plan type, and these 4 uses are allowed to use it, and so they're doing that. You're seeing a new section added, and you're seeing 3 giant sections being deleted. So I think we're actually happy to see this and definitely recommend it. Again, the key differences between these plans and site plans, it's basically shortened review for intake, shortened review for comments. The resolution has to be turned around faster. Kind of on the back end, though, the applicants are also required to pull permits quicker. Their sort of validity is shortened, so it's expedited on all ends.
And there's nothing within there that prohibits an extension as necessary for anything like that.
Correct. The main change is the extensions have to be applicant requested. The planning staff can't request them like we can for site and sketch plans, but there are options for extensions.
That's my concern, was on the applicant side. Got it.
There are a lot of sections of code interspersed in here that I'm calling technical updates, and it's basically removing references to one of the 3 aforementioned plans and replacing it with expedited approval plan. Obviously, we support these changes. Getting into the climate assessment for 2503, this one we didn't actually make any recommended changes to, and so again, there's a summary of what we sort of thought the impacts were. I think staff here is just recommending we leave that, and since there weren't even any recommended changes, again, if there wants to be discussion, we can, but our recommendation is that we are fine with it. Okay, moving on to Subdivision Regulation Amendment 2501 for expedited approval plan. As it's written, it adds a new administrative subdivision for properties that are used as a commercial to residential reconstruction. The reason they're doing this is it's really to catch up with the idea that you have an expedited process for Chapter 59, the zoning side, should there be an expedited process that mirrors it on the subdivision side. And so this would set that expedited precedent, and it's the same way we've treated the Signature Business Headquarters, the BioHealth, and the Mixed Income. They all got an expedited approval through administrative subdivision process. This is just adding that here in case a subdivision is necessary. What was curious is in 59, we're consolidating all the like plan types into one. They didn't do that for Chapter 50. We think this is the opportunity to do it. So our recommendation would basically edit the Signature Business Headquarters 1, the first one on the list, the E, and just add all of the 4 uses that are allowed. And then you have your 4 standards below for how you review them. If that is not to be done for whatever reason, then we at minimum need to go back into E, F, and G and make sure that the plan type that you are referencing for eligibility is the expedited approval plan and not the plans that are being deleted out of 59. So again, we really want to do the one, but we think we should just tell council it's kind of an either or, but you need to pick one kind of path. Getting into the last section of code.
Can I
Mr.
just ask
Bodie?
one last question, just so I understand? So the last bill was for a subdivision, correct? And that is if from what I understand, in our case, if the commercial to residential needed some lot consolidations or something, is that what?
Yeah,
Again,
it could be a lot of things. It could be the need for consolidation. It could be the need for subdivision, depending on what they're trying to do. It may be that, there's dedication that's necessary and we need to see a subdivision. There could be an approved plan that already is there and we need to actually do a subdivision to allow a different use to be happening on the property. So there's a lot of reasons subdivision might get triggered on almost anything that we do. And so this is just to make sure that if it's necessary, we have an expedient process that can be reviewed under, rather than the standard 120-day
okay, great. 'Cause,
process.
Yep, I was thinking that if there's a standard commercial building and you just wanted to convert it, nothing else changed, you may not, and you're not going to tear it down and rebuild. You could just, you wouldn't need to go through that subdivision process, but you may not, or you may, right? Even if you didn't tear it down and rebuild. Right?
Yeah, I unless that property is already on a platted lot and was old enough that we didn't have a preliminary plan that created that lot, that would be the only way that they probably could avoid subdivision. If it's a 70s or 80s era building, there's probably a preliminary plan that created the lot, and it probably says this lot is only good for an office building. We would have to amend that to allow a housing development to happen there. So it's sort of annoying, but this is the way of at least making it a little less painful.
Okay, thank you.
And now for the last sections of our report, we are almost done. Ms. Scavone will take over from here.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. I'm giving him a break. He did just walk through, 70 slides. So we're going to talk a little bit about, very quickly, the Bill 225 about taxation payment in lieu of taxes, affordable housing amendments. Next slide. So the Bill 2-25 would require the Director of Finance to offer a pilot, which is essentially a tax abatement, for residential development resulting from the conversion of a property that was designated for commercial use but had at least 50% vacancy rate. It would allow a 25-year pilot and exempt real property tax for 100% of real property tax. Next slide. So to be eligible for the pilot, the project must allow also rent at least 15% of the units earning 60% or less of the AMI for 25 years. Planning staff supports this, but also would like to recommend that the planning board consider broadening the affordability to include for sale units. A lot of the office conversions in the county, the Octave, the Elon, they're condominiums. So this would just allow to expand the applicability of the pilot. And lastly, many of the elements in the Housing Now package involve the use of the county's workforce housing program. To be honest, the workforce housing program has seen limited applicability. It's not mandatory. There's no incentives like the MPDU program. There's no bonus density or additional height. There's also been challenges with maintaining affordability of these units. The rents and the sales price quickly approach unaffordability or close to market rents just because of, for example, we have workforce housing units in Shady Grove, and I believe the workforce housing rents are only about $60 different. We can't fix workforce housing in the context of a ZTA. We would need a bill. So we're recommending the planning board support a future recommendation to allow to look into Chapter 25B, which is the chapter of code that looks at workforce housing. This may all be unnecessary because DHA is looking at the MPDU program, and one of the things they're looking at is income averaging, which would allow up, lower AMI and up to workforce housing. But this just would be a helpful reminder that, we understand the program's limits, but we also understand it's not reason to do the ZTA, but we need to look into it.
Yeah, I really like this recommendation, and we certainly don't need to put this in as part of the recommendation, but I hope that at some point we can also reconsider the name workforce housing. If we kind of look into this program and reconsider kind of how it's being useful, is it being used or not? There's a lot of problems, I think, with the term workforce housing and who it excludes and what it implies. It's 70% AMI to 120% AMI, right?
Right.
And I think the insinuation that anyone making under that level of AMI, which is a huge number of people, right? I mean, we can basically calculate it directly. It's a huge number of people and households that somehow they're not working and are not deserving of housing. I know that's not what the program is saying, but I think they're, in an effort to sort of be a little bit more inclusive in our housing policies in general and how we're sort of characterizing them, I hope that if we do look into this in the future, we can simply, if we want to target income ranges, I think, something that Commissioner Hedrick talks about all the time with natural occurring affordable housing, I don't think there's any reason we can't just be specific about the income levels that we want to talk about. And we don't need to use labels. We don't need to sort of exclude through the use of labels. So just something, food for thought in the future if we do look into this.
Thank you.
Hey, look at that. In conclusion, we are recommending transmittal of comments. We've already voted on 2502, so this would apply to 2503, SRA 2501, and Bill 225 with the recommendations that we have been discussing today and taking copious notes on.
Awesome.
Yeah, let's do this, and I have a comment afterwards. So, so do I have a motion to recommend to the county council moving forward this ZTA number 2503, SRA 2501, and Bill 0225 with recommended amendments discussed today?
Yeah, I'll move to transmit the comments and the recommendations to the county council for the three.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it 4-0. And I would like to say, yes, thank you, staff, for this detailed dive into the ZTAs. It was a lot of work, and I really, really appreciate it. And also, I also commend the sponsors of these ZTAs and bills for their hard work in putting them together and building consensus around, and the council for them. As we said, housing, we have a great shortage. It's a critical need, and all pieces help. All pieces help, and so we're moving this forward so that this hopefully can be approved, and we have new options for housing in the county. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say one more quick thing?
One more quick thing.
One more quick thing. I just wanted to also just kind of reemphasize, I think, something that was brought up before, that we don't see this as a replacement for corridor planning. And I think, right before this session, we saw a great example of what corridor planning could look like when we were looking at the Glenmont study and Georgia Avenue when it goes up and meets Randolph Road, and renderings and illustrations of what sort of a complete community that involves a corridor, that involves lots of different housing typologies on those corridors, but is done so in a way that, thinks about the streetscape, it thinks about amenities, it thinks about livability, it thinks about, trees in terms of air quality being in such close proximity to those high speed and high volume corridors. As the chair mentioned, I think this is a great first step, and I think I also commend council for trying to move the ball forward with some housing production in a really difficult environment. But I think we need to keep in mind that we're talking about 2,400 parcels that are exclusively on our highest speed corridors, directly on those corridors. And some of these corridors have daily traffic volumes that are extremely high. And because we're not doing this as part of a corridor planning approach, we're simply saying that in effect, one of the only ways that we can accommodate more growth in this context right now is to put people on these roads where there's the greatest traffic volumes, where there's the highest crash rates in the county, where the air quality is the worst, and all the research points to extremely adverse impacts for folks who live near roads that have some of these traffic volumes. You know, Connecticut Avenue peaks near 70,000 people a day. And a lot of these corridors are equally high. And I just wanted to point that out because this is a first step, and I think we need to really think more seriously and double down on true corridor planning, because that's the way in which we can avoid, you know, what could be a form of unequitable growth in cases where we're putting people where it's you know, some of the environmental consequences may be the worst, but you know, instead thinking about how we transform those environments to make it some of the most attractive places to live in the county. So I hope that we can kind of do more of that in the future, and this maybe can be a first step to that.
Okay, if no other questions or comments, thank you all for staff that puts on these planning board meetings, and this ends our planning board meeting. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next week.